There might be an issue someday. I don't know.
Talking about it, we're just saying, yeah. It's all right.
Okay. All right, folks, let's get this show on the road here. Welcome to day 2 of the Select Blockchain Committee here in Sheridan. Of course, this is home turf for me, so it's God's country. Glad you're all here. I think we got some, Mr. Chairman, we got some good agenda topics today. Before we delve into it, we probably should call the roll, should we not?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Yeah, why not?
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call for the Select Committee on Blockchain for July 2nd. Senator Ellis. Senator Furphy.
Here.
Senator Nethercott.
Excuse.
Representative Andrew. Representative Singh.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Mr. Kaufman.
Excused.
Mr. Pope.
Excused.
Mr. Revel.
Here.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Here.
Chairman Western.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Outstanding. Thank you, Clarissa. So I think we've got Stable Token up first. Are they, Clarissa, are they on,
I think they're online.
are they in Zoom world? Apollo, are you there and are you ready?
Sounds good. And I know Mr. Land will be joining at
Yeah, I think we've got
8:45. So there's Mr. Apollo.
Mr. Apollo. How are you?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Excellent. Obviously, we know who you are, all that stuff. I think you got some good stuff you want to share with us, but of course, for the record, please state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. This is Anthony Apollo. I'm the Executive Director with the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. And quickly before I get started here, I know we had a little bit of an issue last time with audio quality. I want to make sure I'm coming to you loud and clear this time around.
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And one more quick check that I like to do before we dive into these updates. We do have 2 of our commissioners, Commissioner Joel Reville and Commissioner David Pope, as liaisons on the select committee, who are also serving on the commission. So I would just like to make sure that if there are any other commissioners on this call in speaking capacity, I would ask them to quickly drop off to avoid reaching a quorum of our commission, therefore needing to notice a public meeting. So I'll just give them a second to do that quickly if they are online, not seeing any. And with that being said, it's the pleasure of the select committee. I'm happy to dive into a quick update from the Stable Token Commission.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, this will be a quick update. And we had a much more robust one during the late May meeting of the select committee. So we'll hop right into some of the updates from our side. So first off, an update on the procurement end from the Stable Token Commission. So if you recall, during the 2024 budget session, the Stable Token Act was amended in a way to allow the commission to pursue its own procurement through competitive bidding and to promulgate its own rule set for procurement. So since we last spoke, we have drafted a set of procurement rules. Those went in front of the commission last Thursday and were approved by the commission, which has now authorized me to go ahead and pursue both emergency rulemaking and regular rulemaking in parallel for those procurement rules. That will allow us, once those are in effect, to begin running a pre-qualification process with potential vendors, and then subsequently a request for proposal process for qualified vendors that will allow us to identify the best organizations. Again, that could be a singular organization or a consortium of organizations to go ahead and help us build the Wyoming Stable Token. Again, that'll be on the technical side, on the operational side, on the legal and finance side. So there's a bunch of different verticals here. But the goal for us is, again, to get those rules in place, begin our pre-qualification process, and then begin pursuing vendors through a request for proposal phase. The goal for us is, at the end of the day, to have vendors engaged and to be starting to build on the Wyoming Stable Token before the end of the 3rd quarter of this calendar year. And I will quickly pause there for any questions on the procurement side of things.
Committee members, any question for Director Paulo? Anybody online? Not seeing any. I do have a few questions, but I'll wait until the end. So Director Paulo, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Will do. Next topic for us to discuss is recruitment. So again, we do have a $5.8 million budget for the biennial fiscal year 2025. And as part of that, we are looking to bring on 4 new roles to help us accelerate our progress with the Stapleton Commission. Those 4 roles are a senior business project manager, a chief financial officer, a chief information and security officer, and a chief risk and compliance officer. So those roles have gone live over the course of June. And since then, so about over the last 3 weeks, we've had over 65 applicants across those 4 positions. So one of the things that the commission also accomplished in its last meeting, last week, was to put forth an agency hiring policy that will delineate how we can screen and filter and interview these candidates over the coming weeks. The goal for us is to do that filtering and screening process first, and that'll predominantly be run by my office. And then we'll set up evaluation committees to do formal interviews with some of these candidates and begin, hopefully onboarding them within the coming weeks to months. So we can bring on a bit more firepower here, and then those responsibilities will be well delineated. We already went through the process of carving out, job content questionnaires and all of that. So we have a really great roadmap for all of these different personnel to be working with us on. Again, I'll pause there again if there's any questions, but we are essentially kicking off the process of screening and interviewing potential candidates for these roles in the coming weeks and months.
Members, any questions for the director? So Director, it sounds like there's been quite a bit of interest. I know you can't go into too much detail, but where do you think stand with filling some of those key roles?
Excellent question, Mr. Chairman. So looking at the applications that have come in, I will say there's a lot of great talent. We do have a number of people who are experienced in both the traditional side of the traditional end of the roles we need. So for example, candidates on the finance side, as well as those with very deep technical and hands-on experience with blockchain, digital assets, and stablecoin specifically.
And follow-up, Director, I assume you still have to go through all the normal A&I processes that any other state agency would. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, we did go through A&I to get these positions listed on the state's NeoGov platform. I will be very specific and mention that the Stapleton Commission does have the statutory authority to fix compensation and employ resources as it sees fit. So we do have there's a bit of a broad remit there. But that being said, at this point in time, this is still a one-man agency. So we were able to rely on A&I to kind of help us put the structures that we need in place. And now we're transitioning to the perspective where we have a hiring policy in place that allows a little bit more leeway to go through and define how the commission itself will be screening, interviewing, and onboarding candidates going forward.
Thank you, Director. I think what I heard in there, maybe not explicitly, was that I'm going to credit my good co-chairman for making sure the commission does have that authority to to delegate and compensate as they see fit. Committee members or Mr. Co-chairman, any questions for the director? Seeing none, please proceed, Director Paulo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 more topics here. The next one is our budget. So again, I mentioned the Stapleton Commission did receive a budget of $5.8 million for the biennial fiscal year 2025. So again, that'll bring us from functioning yesterday to June 30th of 2026. It's important to note a couple of things about that budget. First is we do have a statutory responsibility to pay all of that money back to the general fund. So every dollar that we take out, we are obligated to put back in. And one of the other features of this is the $5.8 million is not $5.8 million flat. It's $5.8 million less the money that we did not spend in the biennial fiscal year of 2023. So I like to think that we have been fairly good fiscal stewards of the budget we received through statute for BFY 23. If we are going to use some round numbers here, we've only used about $215,000 of the $500,000 allocation. So we're rolling about $285,000 into the next fiscal year. So I worked through all of that with SAO and ANR yesterday to confirm our June 30th numbers were correct. And I believe that the process of sending the rest of the funds to the stable token account is currently in process and not already done by this morning. And again, if there's any questions on budget, I'll stand for those at this time. There's just one more quick topic and then we can do more broad questions as well.
Members, any questions? Seeing none, please proceed.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last topic here is a quick one in subcommittees. Again, we are looking to avail ourselves of the wisdom of the crowd across a number of fairly complex topics here. So one of the things that had happened before my tenure was standing up subcommittees to help work through particular tactical issues. We are now resuscitating those. There's essentially 4 subcommittee verticals. There's legal, finance, technical, and operations. And each of those will have 2 or more working groups therein. Those have been structured to date. We are working through a platform called Notion, which is also the website that runs the Stable Token Commission's online presence. So there's a lot of collaborative tools behind the scenes there that we're using to work with external subject matter advisors and bring them into the fold here as we work through different topics like internal controls or business plan or revenue models, or even the technical build outs and schematics for the stable token. So those are still coming online because we do need to make sure we reach out to qualified individuals. We have them sign off on a code of conduct that says, if you are one of our subject matter advisors, you will not be proposing a book of paid work in the future, and making sure we have a well-delineated group of participants in that capacity. So more to come on that, but again, I'm very excited about the progress we've made on that front. And at this point in time, I'm going to just be a quick update. I said, keep it to within 10 minutes, and I think I've done so far. So I will stand for any questions from the select committee at this time.
Members, any questions for the director? Or was it, I don't think there's any online. Director, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just touch a little bit on some of these subject matter experts that you guys are focusing on bringing in. Where would you say the greatest need is amongst all the different areas that you're dealing with on the commission?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I would say that the largesse of subject matter advisors that we're looking for would be on the technical side. This is obviously still emerging technology. There are new features and technologies being rolled out on a week-to-week basis. And it behooves us to find out and to really dig into the technical schematics of any given blockchain and privacy features and expedient transaction features. So there's a lot of things we need to make sure we're aware of as we put the stable token together to make sure we have the best offering possible, one that is competitive in the market against the current incumbents. And also we need to make sure that any kind of particular features we're looking for also is being analyzed from a legal perspective as well. So while we have these different pillars of tech and legal and finance, those all need to stand on their own. They also need to work completely sympathetically with each other. And that's where it's going to be a bit of an effort here, but I think we've got the right people involved to help us bring this to fruition.
Thank you, Director. If I recall correctly from our May meeting, you were talking about there's been quite a few vendors from across the spectrum who've reached out and have expressed interest. Could you maybe just touch on briefly some of the criteria that you're using to kind of whittle those ones down from, you know, the ones that fit what you're looking for to the ones you think are serious and within line of what's needed with the commission?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So one quick note that I'll make is we are working on the pre-qualification surveys now. So I don't want to say too much about the specificity of what we'd be looking for any given vendor or consortium of vendors in a particular area. But 2 more things I'll quickly note on that. One is, at this point in time, I've talked to over 550 individuals across over 250 organizations who are interested in some way, shape, or form in assisting us bringing this product to market. So there is a large amount of vendors that are interested. I think that's a testament to the work the select committee has done over the last almost decade at this point. in terms of creating interesting work for people to engage with. Secondly, what I'd say is I believe, perhaps our March or April meeting, one of the things that I put forth in discussion with the commission was how we would take the 30 or so features that we believe we need across again these 4 verticals and consolidate them into maybe 4 to 6 requests for proposals. Because what we don't want to have is a situation where we have a fairly small team running day-to-day operations here that's responsible for overseeing 15 plus vendors all doing individual things. We are looking to consolidate in that capacity. And what we need to do is kind of bring those, we propose a consolidation of features into some RFPs, which again will be completed at a later point in time. But that is how we are thinking about bringing those books of work forward. And then in terms of the candidates that are potentially doing this work, again, we've talked to everybody from individual developers who provide smart contracts and some of the largest organizations in this industry and everyone in between. So when we do the pre-qualifications, again, I'm not going to say much about that because we're still working through it, but at the forefront of our thinking is that Wyoming's reputation will be on the line with this project. And as a result, we need to work with the most qualified, experienced, and secure vendors we can find. And that will be reflected in pre-qualification surveys when they're live.
Thank you, Director Apollo. Members, any questions, Mr. Co-Chairman?
Nope, sounds
No.
great.
Director, thank you very much for your work on this. I know you haven't been here too long, but you've already put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So we really appreciate all your efforts on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And I will be on the meeting for the rest of the morning. So if there's any public comment at the end of this section that is directed our way, I'm more than happy to respond to anything that is asked.
Excellent. Oh, wait, one sec. Representative Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to commend Director Apollo for his prudent spending, that he's been able to efficiently budget and come under the line. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you.
Excellent. So I think up next, we've got maybe some updates on some of the federal legislation. Mr. Land, are you online with us? There he is. Excellent. Well, obviously you're an old friend of this committee, but just for the record, please state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members, Chris Land, General Counsel to U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Mr. Chairman, if you're okay with it, I'll just give a brief update on kind of the latest happenings in Washington, and then I will stand for any questions. Does that sound good?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lummis continues to ensure Wyoming's approach to digital asset regulation is, enshrined and respected in Washington, D.C. There are a number of potential movers that, this committee should keep its eye on in the coming months. There continue to be discussions about the U.S. Senate Ag Committee potentially, marking up legislative product in the coming months. We'll have to see whether that progresses or not, and that would just be on what's called market structure, and by that I mean drawing the line between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, and providing a pathway for digital asset exchanges to register with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. There also remains a possibility that stablecoin legislation could move at some point in the next few months. And if a vehicle were to start to move in the Senate, it would likely, come up in the fall in the lame duck, and there would be kind of a frenetic push to try to get it to the president in the lame duck session at the end of the year. Senator Lummis's top priority remains ensuring Wyoming's thoughtful leadership in this area is respected, protected, and exported to the other states as much as possible through federal law. And we are working hard every day with our partners in the Senate on a bipartisan basis, including Senator Gillibrand, and our partners in the House, including Chairman McHenry, Chairman Thompson, to put together a thoughtful product. I think that's pretty much it. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Members, any question for Ms. Land? Anybody online have questions? Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, is there anything that we should be contemplating through our legislation where we might need some tweaks or some conforming language in light of what you would expect if something does pass this year, really in any of the spaces that you mentioned? Anything that should be on our radar?
Mr. Land?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rothfuss, I would say this committee has already gotten a great start, as it always does, and that's a testament to your leadership. There will very likely need to be, amendments in the stable token area, the SPDI area, and potentially, some of the state securities laws, even potentially. I would just advise this committee to have some legislative vehicles available for, any amendments that might need to be made at the end of the year. So that, you could have vehicles to attach those amendments to for the session next year, and making sure the titles are germane and that kind of thing. I'm not going to know specifically, what the final legislative text will look like probably for a few months. But I do think it's important for Wyoming to maintain its lead to, potentially address these issues in a 2025 legislative session. I can't speak with any specificity because, we're just not there yet, but I would be very surprised if there weren't amendments necessary. I'm aware this committee is working on a special purpose depository institution bill that could very likely serve as a vehicle for many of these amendments. But as I mentioned, there could be potential for some needed changes in the stable token area and in the securities areas too.
Mr. Co-Chairman, follow up?
No, thank you. Appreciate that. That's helpful.
Yeah, I do think it might be worthwhile, just depending on what goes on at the federal level, to keep that handy. Committee members, any further questions? Representative Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Land, what kind of opposition has Senator Lummis been facing in the chamber there? What have they been saying in opposition to this idea?
Mr. Land?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Singh, thank you for your question. So there's been a great deal of bipartisan interest in digital assets the last few months. For a lot of factors, Senator Lummis has been working really hard to develop bipartisan relationships for the last 3.5 years, and a lot of that work is starting to bear fruit. The political situation with President Trump and President Biden has also had an effect on this process. I would say most of the opposition that we are facing has been from those areas of the Senate that have historically been very opposed to digital assets, just philosophically, like Senator Warren from Massachusetts. She's completely opposed to digital assets for a lot of reasons, just philosophically and from the risk perspective.
Representative Singh, follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Land, I really do appreciate Senator Lummis's intentional bipartisan work, and big ideas take a lot of collaboration.
Thank you, Representative Singh. That's our top priority. It's very, very hard sometimes given the current political climate, but it's our boss's top priority. So thank you. Thank you for your support of this issue too.
Any other questions for Mr. Land? Seeing none.
Mr. Chairman?
Or Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Yeah, one other area, are we seeing anything with any of the federal agencies, anything new on the horizon? We've obviously been reading about moves and actions within the SEC. Anything that's on your radar with regard to federal agencies that might be a new and interesting update?
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Rothfuss. There has been a slight shift at the SEC that's been driven by some of the political dynamics likely, and the grayscale SEC decision on the exchange traded funds. I would also say there's active discussions in the executive branch right now about whether Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 should stand or be revoked by the SEC. That's the accounting treatment of digital assets and the accounting standards thing that Senator Lummis has been working on for the last few years. I will say there's been an uptick in de-risking and debanking activity from the federal banking agencies. More digital asset companies have had their accounts pulled in the last few months than as it is kind of the normal standard. So I think that does evidence some activity by the banking agencies telling their depository institutions to think again about whether you should bank crypto company X or reconsider your relationship with crypto company Y. The Federal Reserve is, a matter of pending litigation. I would urge everyone to take a look at the 10th Circuit docket tomorrow when all the amicus briefs in the Custodia matter are filed. Custodia filed its brief last week too, so would urge this committee to keep a close eye on that litigation. That's probably the most important factor in, the relationship between the federal banking agencies and the digital asset industry at this point.
Mr. Land, it seems like it's more than coincidental. I noticed that multiple Speedies withdrew their applications for master accounts on the same day, which again, seems like a bit more than just a coincidence. One question, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit. You talked about I think you said Senate Ag wants to draw further delineation between the SEC and the CFTC. Did I hear that correctly?
Mr. Chairman, the Ag Committee is only focused on the CFTC portion because of their committee jurisdiction. The SEC piece would have to come from a place other than the Ag Committee. And on the Federal Reserve piece, I'm reliably informed that the withdrawal of the master account applications from the two applicants was not malignant action by the Federal Reserve, and I'm happy to talk about it more offline. It looks worse than it actually is in this point. I'm sorry to say.
Huh? We'll take that reassurance.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, at our last meeting, we had a discussion about CFIUS action in southeastern Wyoming, and you provided some context for that. I was wondering if you could give us any updates on the status of that action and how things turned out.
Mr. Land, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not completely tracking your question. Could you say it again, rephrase it a bit? I'm sorry.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, related to the cryptocurrency, the Bitcoin mining operation in Southeast Wyoming and the action taken by the administration, just a follow-up on where things stand.
Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Rothfuss. I haven't heard any more news out of that particular issue the last few weeks, which is definitely good news. There was an acquisition pending, and since there hasn't been a further statement from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, it's my assumption that that transaction was allowed to proceed. I could be wrong about that, but I haven't heard any new derogatory news about Bitcoin mining in that area. So I assume things are proceeding, but I would be interested if anyone else knows any information on that.
I don't see anybody jumping to answer that question. Mr. Co-Chairman?
No, and I appreciate that. If you do hear more, please let us know.
Yeah, of course.
Well, if I'm not seeing any further questions from the committee, Mr. Land, as always, thank you very much for your diligence on these issues. I think we've got some good topics, obviously, for Speedies and some talk about the Federal Reserve and master accounts later on the agenda this morning. So if possible, we'd love for you to stick around just in case.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Before we move on to our next topic, obviously for the folks in the room, we need to have public comment on every topic. So was there any state agencies that wanted to weigh in at Division of Banking? I think I see you guys back there. Anybody from the public that wants to testify on this before we close public comment? Seeing none, we're going to close public. Oh, Mr. Meyer, please. Obviously, we know who you are, but for the record, just state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. members of the committee, Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. We've been following the Stable Token and Wyoming Stable Token Commission from its inception. And I remind everybody that the governor, who serves as chairman of that commission, has repeatedly stated that he wants to protect your Wyoming community banks, which I believe that that is true. But keep in mind, when you're doing this, that again, Wyoming is still venturing into an area where there is already private activity. There are other stable tokens, and not one of those stable tokens yet has not been depegged at some point in time. So we still remain very cautiously optimistic, I guess is probably that, but we're watching it very carefully. The other thing is that I want to bring to your attention, and we've had this conversation with the Capital Finance Committee as well, is that remember, every time that you take a dollar out, whether it's to do whatever it is to invest in a Wyoming stable token, and maybe a lot of that money would probably come from foreign sources or other sources, who knows? But every time you take any of that money out from a Wyoming community bank, that means that that bank has that much less funds to invest in its communities. They still have the Community Reinvestment Act. They still have bonding and requirements when it comes to public funds, but they have less money to actually invest in the local shoe store, the pizza parlor, the car dealership, or whatever. So keep in mind, as this is going on, that we're going to be watching this very carefully, just because we're trying to protect not only our community banks, but our communities as well. Certainly stand for any questions.
Committee members, any question for Mr. Meyer? Mr. Co-Chairman? Mr. Meyer, so is the scenario you're envisioning, just to make sure I understand properly, that John Doe on the streets of Sheridan, instead of investing his money in, you know, the local community or otherwise, would then turn around and invest it in this? Is that the scenario that you're worried about?
Mr. Chairman, I think that the scenario I'm worried about is that we're trying to sell this as a very easy way to do transactions. And that easy way to do transactions has costs. And that cost impacts your community banks as well as especially your communities. So I'm always watching to make sure that we are in fact protecting your community banks, because they are in fact protecting your communities. That's where the backbone of this country is built, is on small businesses and communities.
Seeing no further questions, is there any online? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Appreciate
Thank
it. Any other public testimony on this one? I'm not seeing any. All right, public testimony is closed. I think on to our next topic, special purpose depository institutions. I think we've got some folks from the Business Council here. Ron, obviously, we know who you are, but state your name and who you're with, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ron Goldberg, Strategic Partnerships Director for the Wyoming Business Council. Appreciate the invitation to join this discussion today. Our business recruitment manager, Wendy Lopez, sends her regrets. She had a schedule conflict today. Wanted to try to join this. I listened to the last meeting, the portion about the Sweetie banks, and it seemed like there was a discussion kind of carved out of that about outreach and marketing efforts. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of perspective on what the Business Council works on and with partners and others. And also maybe bake in a little bit of the broader, looking at the draft bill yesterday that the committee worked on with renaming the committee and then kind of expanding emerging technologies. So kind of how that works into the stuff we're working on with partners and private industry and such, if that sounds fine, Mr. Chairman. So
Please proceed.
all right, thank you. The simple answer is yes, we would love to work with this committee and the private interests and partners and whoever, whether it's like in a working group form or what have you. But we are working on refreshing, updating we have industries web pages on the Business Council website. We want to look at that blockchain web page. It's time for some refreshing. be good to have maybe some collaborative understanding with the expertise with this committee and partners to work out what do we need on there, what needs refreshed. There's conferences, trade shows, what have you. And we work really closely, of course, with Steve Lupien. He's been a big help, especially when we get interest and questions. But again, I think maybe some standard talking points or what have you that could be created. We're all on the same page, sharing the same message, getting the awareness out there and the needs. In talking with Wendy out on the recruitment trail, I think the number one thing she hears is how impressed and people admire the University of Wyoming Blockchain Center of Excellence. So I think, again, as we look with what efforts they're having with outreach, how we collaborate on that and build on that and leverage that entity as part and parcel to the legislation and the advantages for Wyoming. So if that makes sense. And also, I think real quickly, I know there's a couple draft bills on this topic too. I just kind of wanted to bake in with when you're talking about blockchain and emerging technologies, the lack of available power is a concern. That's not necessarily in the Business Council's wheelhouse. I don't want to speak for others. I know there are committees working on that, the Energy Authority, utilities. From economic development perspective, what we see is the communities with their hands up saying, in parts of Wyoming, this is an issue and we're losing on potential opportunities. So when you look at the holistic approach to emerging technologies and blockchain, there's that issue. And an opportunity, I think, with maybe a third component is the workforce, that Wyoming's population is aging. We're losing tertiary educated, we're a young talent to other states. And I think the data, we're losing, like, for every 4, we're losing 3 of them, retaining 1. So an opportunity, and this could be baked into the outreach and marketing effort too, is to get some diversity in the industries in Wyoming, emerging technologies from blockchain to controlled environment agriculture, heavy R&D in controlled environment agriculture happening right now, expanding in Laramie. These AI, quantum information, you have it, that whole gamut. These are opportunities to potentially retain our young talent and attract expats, perhaps, with the Wyoming Grown type program with workforce services. So we're doing a lot of collaborative efforts with a lot of agencies, workforce services, WCDA, what have you. So I just kind of wanted that economic development type perspective and working with communities and trying to help them expand their capacity efforts and their ability to take control in their communities and find their barriers to growth and their unique problems and opportunities. That there's very narrow, you called me here for Speedy Banks today, but you could see that it kind of grows into emerging technologies, the issues with lack of available power, and the opportunities with workforce if we can retain those people that are leaving the state. So happy to take any questions from there.
Committee members, any questions? Mr. Goldberg, Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Goldberg, for being here, and we appreciate having this conversation. First of all, I'll start by noting that I do appreciate the work that's already been done and working with Wendy in the past, putting together the web page, and it probably is time, as you noted, for a refresh to make sure that we're reflecting all the things that have happened since we last did that work. But a few questions. The first is, you mentioned going to conferences and trade shows and things along those lines to recruit. I know you do that in other business spaces. have there been any in the digital asset and blockchain space that the Business Council has been able to attend in recent years? I'm not familiar with whether there are any that are being targeted.
Mr. Goldberg, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, correct. And in talking with Wendy, I think that again, with this collaborative effort, however that looks coming out of today, with the engagement of what, can we get some expertise on what is out there? What's the prime targeted conference or trade show, et cetera? You're correct. We haven't done that in a while. I
Okay.
think it's probably been, was it just after COVID? I don't remember. There was a South by Southwest
Yeah.
conference there, and Wyoming hosted an event on the side of that. But definitely something we would like to learn more about. How we really effectively,
Right.
or where do we go?
And Mr. Chairman, this
Go,
is
Chairman,
an
please.
area where I think partnership is a good suggestion, because we typically have members of our community, Mr. Lupian that you mentioned as an example, people that are attending some of these conferences that might be great places for Wendy or other Business Council members to be there and to team up on those, find out, who's going and form a little Wyoming group where we've got some of our content experts and then some of our business development experts together on that team reaching out. I think that could be, one way to move this forward. So I appreciate that opportunity. On the lack of available power, Mr. Chairman, this is something that we've talked a lot about over the years on this select committee. We've talked a lot about it in the legislature, and we've struggled to crack this problem. We have a lot of power in the state of Wyoming, but it's the available part that becomes the key, where it's all committed elsewhere. And over half of the power that's generated in the state of Wyoming ends up going out of state. So the question, Mr. Goldberg, at this point, and you may not have a strong opinion on the details, but is this a statutory challenge? Is this a challenge for working through our regulatory structure, working with the PSC, working with our producers, or a combination thereof? Do you have any thoughts on what part of the process is holding us back right now and where we should be focused?
Mr. Goldberg, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't know that I would speak to, digging in the weeds that far. I, as I mentioned, there are others actively involved in this, and we're trying to keep aware of that and helping inform people, like, what are we hearing about possible barriers to potential opportunities. So I think Minerals is working on some legislation. I know the Energy Authority, and there are other people focusing on that. Very broadly, it sounds a little bit of all that you described, but I don't want to speak for other people who are working on this effort all the way to the PSC. So.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, but to be clear,
Please.
Mr. Goldberg, from your perspective, you are hearing of potential, whether it's industries, new facilities, companies, but endeavors that look at Wyoming and then end up rejecting Wyoming because they can't get the power that they need. Is that accurate?
Mr. Goldberg, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss. Yeah, I think that, in kind of the typical business recruitment fashion, you try to work to yes. And then it can be for various reasons. It could be workforce or what have you. And there are instances where it's lack of available power, like, that we can't work to yes because of that barrier. So that's my understanding from people in that realm.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one challenge we've also heard is that it's not even necessarily just lack of available power, which is often the case, but lack of knowing if there is available power and the ability to even ask the question, if we were to locate a facility here, could we get 10 megawatts of power? And you can't get that answer. Is that an experience that you've had from the business development side of things as well?
Mr. Goldberg.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothus, yeah, hearing from recruitment team and then the partners they work with at the community economic development level or city or county. I know I think there's been some efforts for the intake, the information, enhancing that, but still, I think there's work going on to try to find out what is available or what is the opportunities. I haven't heard the latest since that kind of intake request form has been in operation. But again, I know there are steps. People are trying to figure this out. It's a longstanding issue that you try to unwind in a short time. It took a long time to get here. And just unwinding it takes time and collaborative efforts. So.
Mr. Co-Chairman?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next barrier that you mentioned was with regard to workforce. What can and should we be doing to meet those workforce needs? In my experience, in talking with these companies is that is often one of their top priorities is, can we get enough qualified people to be working these jobs at a specific location? Is that something that you've seen ticking positive in the state of Wyoming? Are there more things we could do, whether it's through this select committee or be contemplating it in other committee assignments? Any thoughts on that workforce aspect?
Mr. Goldberg?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. Yeah, I think there are things being done. I think as we look at, today, there's an issue with finding available workforce across the board for industries in Wyoming. As you look in the future, are we working toward the diverse economic opportunities and industries and the good job creation opportunities, and then how do we retain, as I said earlier, that workforce that is leaving the state? And so we have a current issue. You talk to employers across the state, whether it's workforce or housing, et cetera, the whole chicken and egg problem. There's immediate need, but 5-10 years down the road, are we capitalizing on these opportunities? I think that's one component of what we're talking about today with this collaborative opportunity for outreach and marketing and addressing some of the barriers to that growth. And so I guess what I'm getting at to your question is there's an opportunity out there, and what are we doing to set up to create those jobs and then fill those jobs with existing talent and things. That's why the powerful marketing of the Center for Blockchain Excellence, for one example, for one industry, there are other opportunities out there. So I look for a collaborative discussion. And we do work with workforce services and others, like I said. So we put our heads together and look at these opportunities. What are the roots, the barriers of those, and then how do we overcome those? So
Great, thank you. Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Certainly, Mr. Co-Chairman. Members, any other questions? Sitting in line, Mr. Goldberg, obviously, Co-Chairman and I, we've been very frustrated for a long time with our utilities and quite frankly, just the lack of engagement and the what I feel is kind of just this anti-business sentiment when it comes to these crypto miners. I appreciate crypto still has its skeptics, but I think the reason all of us should really care is ultimately that, okay, you don't like crypto mining, that's fine. But what if it's the next light manufacturer, the next Weatherby, or the next, Kennan Designs, or any of these outfits, and they need power and they get told no, or they just don't get the cooperation, or that kind of business friendly attitude, I think that really helps recruit those companies and create those jobs. My question is, I know there's a lot of buzz going on in Wyoming right now about the new data center that Meta is intending to build in Cheyenne. Do you know anything about the nature of that power agreement? And if so, could you share a little bit about it?
Mr. Chairman, I would call a friend, Wendy, who's there at the announcement today, a project she had been working on with
Is-
Leeds and
Is that
others.
today? Oh, man.
The announcements today.
But yeah, so more intimate knowledge of that, but I understand that working with the utility and others, there's a solar component. And yeah, I don't know the particulars, but I mean that's how, I mean, when I talk about the power issues, a lot of times it's except Cheyenne. They're able to get some capacity down there, and you know, you're getting some data centers as you know, where you're well aware of the last several years. So
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
you
Co-Chair.
know, on that, we see down in in the Cheyenne area, the utility there has certainly been willing to try to find solutions, work towards ways to achieve that power, and so that's the one spot in the state, I think, right now where if you need some power, you've got somebody that'll pick up the phone and work with you. I think it's a struggle in the rest of the state if you want a significant amount of power.
Yeah. Well, any further questions, Mr. Goldberg? We appreciate your time.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the invitation today.
Thanks,
Good to
Ron.
talk.
Appreciate
Absolutely.
you being here.
Thanks for driving up. Feel free to stick around and spread some of those dollars around our local community.
Got Julie
So
next.
yeah, next we've got more on the speedy topic. We've got Julie Fellows, who is CEO of Bankwise. It looks like she is with us. Obviously, Julie, we know who you are, but just for the sake of protocol, could you introduce yourself and who you're with?
Good morning. I'm Julie Fellows, co-founder and CEO of Bankwise.
Please proceed.
I was invited to speak here today and really not given much of an agenda, so I will kind of follow up on what I presented last time. And I know there was discussion and openness to pursuing it. And I think in me following Mr. Goldberg from the Wyoming Business Council, perhaps there's contemplation of a working group between the Speedies with the Wyoming Business Council. I think that there is opportunity to do that. I believe very strongly, though, that the work that needs to be done for the Speedies to progress, as I said before, promote, educate, and collaborate. I think that there are different groups within Wyoming that can help to facilitate different components of that. But I think that very deep knowledge and understanding of Speedy and really the Wyoming infrastructure that has been put in place is necessary to really help with educating how great Wyoming's infrastructure is. And I think there needs to be a level of expertise in the person or group that is out having those discussions.
Ms. Fellows, or I guess first, any question?
You go ahead. Go.
Ms. Fellows, you know, what are the also things you talked about along that collaboration and promotion component? I think that's part of the reason why we pulled in the business council here, because, you know, that's part of their mission or their charter is to help promote the businesses within Wyoming, whether it's light manufacturing, you know, oil and gas, obviously in this realm as well, and crypto technologies. If I recall back, let's see, look through my notes here. You talked about Speedy Banks helping with reciprocity. Could you maybe touch on that a little bit, if possible?
Sure. So one of the reciprocity issues is that currently there are challenges in Speedy Banks being able to operate across the U.S. as a state bank, as any other state bank would across every state. So that's the reciprocity issue that I mentioned, and I think any other members of the Speedies will be able to also speak to that issue. So there's reciprocity and there's also there's both state and federal understanding and appreciation for really the very robust infrastructure that has been created. It's very well thought out. And I think the regulatory regime is very solid, and that needs to be promoted in a way that people who get into the details understand. So I don't think I think there can be some discussion and promotion at a high level, but there needs to be the expertise to be able to get into very specific discussions around the infrastructure that has been created and why it is robust and how it is beneficial to the industry.
Mr. Co-Chairman?
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Fells. And again, thank you for engaging in this discussion with us and sort of inspiring the discussion a few times ago when you presented. At that level of depth, who would you target for communication? So if we had our Wyoming envoy that had that level of expertise in the details of the regulations, who would be a few of the targets that you would want contacted and some time spent with?
Ms. Fellows?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think that there is one of the sort of most necessary areas where education needs to be taking place at that level of expertise is within both the state, other state regulatory bodies, as well as the Federal Reserve and the FDIC. So federal banking regulatory agencies as well as state agencies. And it's really to help them all to understand the risks and how those risks have been mitigated. Digital assets and cryptocurrencies are still very new, and I think that there is a lack of understanding of how risks can be mitigated. And I think those need to be the top of the list for education to get those entities comfortable in allowing the reciprocity and moving forward with relationships with federal agencies.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you for that answer. And it sounds like then your impression with regard to the reciprocity it is that it is a matter of understanding rather than anything that is specifically statutory in those instances. So our laws and regulations should suffice to achieve reciprocity in these other states, but they would have to provide an approval, and that approval isn't necessarily happening because they don't understand the rigor of the regulatory structure and really how things work. So just out of that sense of fear of the unknown, that they're not giving the approval. Is that an accurate summary?
Ms. Fellows?
I believe that is accurate.
Okay.
And I think that, you had asked last time, was there anything legislatively that could be done to help with that? And I think it's a great question. I think it's something that perhaps a working group could really look at, and we could pull together to say, what are the specific challenges that different entities are having with regard to various states, and to look to see if there is any wording change or amendment that would be beneficial in moving those forward. But I think at the highest level, I think the risk component and lack of thorough understanding is the biggest issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's helpful. And Mr. Chairman, it seems that we should put together that working group, bring together the members of the Speedies and just have an opportunity to talk that through in the weeds where this is probably not the forum for that. So David and Clarissa, if you'll make a note of that, maybe we can schedule just a little meeting a week from now ish and try and get some Zoom participation to talk through how that might look.
One of many.
Yeah, one of many.
Ms. Fellows, along those lines, I mean, I assume that, the state or states that you're facing the most consternation. I mean, is it the usual suspects? Is it New York, California, those kind of states? Or could you touch on that a little bit?
It's probably better to go into those within the working group session.
Sure. Okay. Certainly. Committee members, any further questions?
What?
Or Ms. Co-Chairman, please.
Yeah, one more. Or Representative Singh, did you have one? Go ahead, Belmans. Okay. Mr. Co-Chairman, kind of at the other level of just getting broader exposure, are there any organizations, conferences, workshops, kind of communities that we should be looking to engage with, perhaps through the Business Council, as we just discussed with Mr. Goldberg a moment ago? Do any come to mind where that representation from the state, just to begin the conversations, might be helpful?
Ms. Fellows, please go ahead.
Thank you. There is a lot of, there are a lot of opportunities, I think, for various conferences. This is where I think it would be really helpful to identify particular people who have skill sets and match them with the objective for those conferences. I mean, I think there's the ability to participate and talk about Wyoming business development and bringing companies to Wyoming. I think it's quite different in sharing the benefits of the regulatory infrastructure that has been created. And so I would say that there's many conference opportunities, and it would be really helpful to identify the participants of those conferences and the objectives.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Co-Chairman.
That's good.
Ms. Wise, did you want to make any remarks on or share any thoughts on some of the drafts that we're working on today, either the defense of state banking or some of these, the amendments to our speedy statutes and their conversions?
We can bring her back maybe.
If not, we can always just bring you back when we move on to those topics as well.
I'm sorry, did you ask if I have questions on any or comments on any of the?
Yeah, did you have any comments on the drafts that we're considering today? If not, we can always
I do.
wait on those.
I do.
Let's bring her back when we. go
Okay,
through 'em.
yeah, actually, Ms. Fellows, let's get through the state agencies on these, and then please do stick around now, because I think your contributions would be appreciative and helpful. Was there anything else you wanted to share with the committee before moving on?
Really just to offer, I have some ideas around how to leverage what's existing in the state and then add to that. And so I think in that working group, one of the things I want to make sure of is that it benefits everybody in the digital space. And so it's not too focused on one entity. And so I think it's really important so that it benefits all speedies, all trusts that are involved in the digital space, the stable token group, everybody, rather than just focusing on one entity.
Okay. Excellent. We'll make sure when we get to the point in the meeting where we have committee directives that we'll take that into consideration.
Okay. Thank you.
So next up on our agenda is Bill Draft 25 LSO 0028, Special Purpose Depository Institutions Amendments. Mr. Hopkinson, you can do it from there or from wherever you'd like, but maybe I know we talked about this last meeting and some of the change that we had talked about. So could you walk us through those if possible?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, taking another look at 25 LSO 28, working draft 0.5. And so I will just, would you like me just to go through and highlight what changed from the last meeting? Because most of the bill, the vast majority is the same.
Please do. That'd be great.
But just to highlight then, really, I think the only change that was made is on page 8. And this dealing in lines 4 through 9, dealing with the amount that someone must maintain on deposit with the institution. Originally that being not less than $5,000. And then at the committee's direction, that's been changed to not less than $1,000. And then there's additional language there that's new, providing that a depositor shall not be deemed in violation of this paragraph unless the total deposit amount is less than $1,000 for 5 or more consecutive business days. So that just provided a bit of a limitation to be in violation of this particular paragraph. If they dipped below, they do have some time to bring it back up to $1,000 or more. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I stand for any questions. Otherwise, the bill remains as the committee looked at last time.
Right. Ms. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hopkinson, I was just quickly looking through the staff comments and I was seeing if we had any actions in the staff comments that we needed to take or if they were all explanatory.
They
there-
were informational. I will note,
Mr. Hopkinson, please.
Mr. Chairman, as I previously mentioned last time, there was some concern or some thought for the committee to consider that this might be 2 subjects within a bill, and the committee may want to consider breaking it down between the conversion portion and then just the amendment portion. But that's certainly for the committee to decide. But I believe those references or the staff comments, double check really quick as well, but I think those were all just informational.
Ms. Co-Chairman?
I'm good. Thanks.
Committee members, any questions for Mr. Hopkinson? And,
Mr. Chairman?
or Ms. Co-Chairman, please.
Yeah, it occurs to me, people might not understand what this bill does. So David, can you take 30 seconds perhaps and say what the bill does? We were at such a high level that I don't think anybody necessarily even knows.
Fair enough, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Hopkinson,
So
proceed.
the first part of the bill then is just allowing for a Speedy Bank to convert from a Speedy into a public trust company, and it provides kind of an expedited process for that would otherwise not be available, and allows for the commissioner of the Division of Banking with approval from the board to grant that conversion, and provides that the date of that essentially the company would be deemed kind of the same company, or that their life and being would be from when they were originally a Speedy, as opposed to starting from when they became a public trust company. And then the other half of the bill just provides some amendments that were requested by the division for 2 Speedy Banks, the Speedy Bank statutes, one of which we just went over. And then the other one is on page 8, just allowing or kind of making some conforming changes to be consistent with other banking statutes.
Mr. Co-Chairman, any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I guess one other question, and this gets into the discussion we had yesterday. This is all Title 13, is my understanding. So I believe this is one of the bills that we would have to work through the Minerals Committee, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Mr. Hopkinson?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hopkinson, I remember the discussion about, dropping that threshold down from 5,000 and have it that rolling average for 5 days, just to give some of these banks a little bit of flexibility to ensure that they're not in violation of some of the state regs. But if you keep going down, then just for my edification, what was the rationale from last time on page 8, the subsection B, the not less than 20% provision? If you could refresh my memory.
Mr. Chairman, my recollection is because that's consistent with what other banks are required to do, but I would defer to the director on the exact reasoning for that change.
Okay. Not seeing any further questions for Mr. Hopkinson. Obviously, please do stick around. So in case I'm sure we'll come up with some kind of question. So yeah, let's go to state agencies. Mr. Bishop, please. Please proceed.
Good morning, Jeremiah Bishop, Banking Commissioner for the Wyoming Division of Banking. Yep, I'll provide some additional comments on this draft, answer some of the questions that came up. And then I do have some comments on the last topic, but I'll refer to you all when that would be best appropriate. So for this draft, obviously this one, I think, as the LSO staff just said, it goes through some additional changes for converting, an SPDI into a trust company. This bill does give us a rulemaking authority on that process. So some of the things we would focus on that rulemaking is what is required with that application and that kind of plan of conversion. Because in effect, if a SPDI chooses to do this, they basically have to shut down banking operations. And so they have to, cease making deposits, making any other changes to their articles and other state filings, basically everything they have to do to cease being a bank and begin being a trust company, because you cannot conduct banking business without being a chartered bank. So that's where a lot of our rulemaking really would be, is certain requirements for that plan of conversion, such as customer notice, making sure that all deposit customers are basically given their deposit back, amending any articles with the Secretary of State to make sure that you're no longer a bank. But then also, this ties into the last topic a little bit, making any changes to other states necessary to make sure that the other states are notified that this is no longer a bank, it is now a trust company, and that the resulting company will have to work with those other states for various licensing items. Because if you're not a bank in this state, you're also not a bank in those other states. You also may not be exempt from other items such as money transmitter licenses, things like that. But that's going to be different for every state they go to. So that will be part of the rulemaking, is making sure the Speedy thinks all that through, contacts everybody they need to contact before we can effectively close the bank side of the business, and then it's a resulting trust company. The change from the last one on page 8, kind of removing the $5,000 account minimum, moving that to 1,000. I think this does address some of the concerns I had. Obviously, I think we decided that we didn't know where that $5,000 came from. And this does also allows, I think, for some flexibility. You still must maintain a minimum balance of $1,000. But if it drops below that, as long as you get it back within 5 days, you're not in violation. Now there is a difference between dropping below $1,000 on this one, and then we have a separate statute that's not being changed. That's the prohibition on lending, which includes overdrafts. That's still in place. So even if a bank drops below $0, that's a violation of that law, which I think was a whole intent. I think we just you discussed last time that you don't want to change that at all. So I think this does allow for some flexibility. I think it's fairly clear to banks what the requirements are, that you must have some mechanism in place to basically alert you when it drops below 1,000. And then that gives them 5 days to contact the customer and say, you need to bring this back up within $1,000 within 5 days.
Right.
So I think it accomplishes that. The one question later on page 8, the changes to capital. This is just I guess a technical accounting change. And it is to make it conform with other traditional banks and our trust companies. The reason we changed this, if I can get into a little bit of the weeds, is a bank, they have various capital accounts. You have common stock, you have surplus, and then you have undivided profits, which is, that's where your net income goes. Common stock is just, the number of shares times the par value. Typically your surplus is anything paid in over par value. And then undivided profits that's where your net income goes at the end of the year, goes into that undivided profit. So in other areas of Title 13, capital stock and surplus are permanent capital. Banks not actually allowed to decrease their surplus without prior approval from us. And then there's certain other restrictions in place until they basically reimburse that surplus fund. So the way this was originally worded, an SPDI upon getting a charter had to basically pre-fund that surplus account for 3 years of expenses. That's kind of their cushion for if they, obviously it's costly to open a de novo bank. They're not going to be profitable right at front. So this provides a capital cushion for those expenses in those first 3 years. But since that went into surplus, that requires our approval at the end of every year that there's a loss. And they're now subject to those same restrictions until that surplus is reimbursed. And so if you look at traditional banking laws, and also our trust company laws, it makes more sense to basically pre-fund that undivided profits account, because that's where losses come out of. And then there's no restrictions. We don't have to provide written approval on that. Is much more efficient. And I'd say accounting wise, it's more accurate. So it's not changing the capital requirements. It's just making it more in line with traditional banks or trust companies and common accounting practices.
That makes sense. Representative Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Bishop. Does having this $1,000 requirement, is that different from any sort of policy that the banks would already institute on their customers?
Mr. Bishop, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Singh. Since the existing statute is just $5,000, we would require the SPDIs to have some type of internal policy for monitoring various accounts to make sure that they don't drop below that. They're still going to have that same policy because they still need to know when it gets close to that $1,000 threshold that they may have to change their customer agreements. But they still need those similar existing policies that they already have. It's literally just changing it from 5,000 to 1,000 and giving them a little bit more flexibility in the timing. It's not an immediate violation. They do have 5 days to correct it. So they'll have to make some changes to policy, but I would not say they're significant changes.
Any follow-up? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. So if I'm struggling with the language as it's written right now. And so if there were, say we were to remove those protections, that threshold, that $1,000 threshold, what would be the consequences for someone that is actually doing business with one of these SPDIs?
Mr. Bishop?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, Representative Singh. So if we were to completely remove this entirely, so there's no minimum requirement, minimum deposit amount, the banks would still need to have something in place because there's a separate provision that prohibits overdrafts. Overdraft is once you go negative, that's a violation. That's considered a loan, and speedies are prohibited from lending. So that's why that's in place. My understanding is this provision was to help provide a cushion for that. But in doing so, it created another violation, and this allows flexibility. So I think if you wanted to remove this, you could, but the bank would still have to have those same policies in place to make sure that they are never having an overdrafted account.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, or Representative Singh, did you have a follow-up?
I was going to follow up on that.
Please, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah. So Representative Singh, recall the discussion, and last time we were talking about it would be nice to remove it, but with the speedy, we never want to extend credit, right? We want that to never take place. And you can't create a little 5-day window or anything along those lines and still achieve the never. So the $1,000 allows us to have a point where we can be a little bit flexible. We can make it a 5-day window. They can correct it, and therefore they won't have as many violations in theory. So that was the compromise. It would be nice if there was a way to do it at the 0, so they have full access to everything. But it ends up violating that principle of no lending that is core to the Speedy Bank. So that this seems to be the best compromise. I don't know if there's a better idea to achieve both of those objectives, but that's the intent there, is to never go negative.
And Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Bishop,
Co-Chairman, another possible idea is if you were to remove this entirely, we would probably put something similar in our rules. that is similar, saying that they must have this policy in place. So whether or not it's in statute, or that's the only, I think the only other option is you would remove this and then we'd basically replace it in a rule. So
Mr. Bishop, I gather buffers are a good thing.
yes.
But Representative Singh, any more follow-up? Okay. Committee members, or Mr. Pope, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is probably going to have to be discussed in the rulemaking process on this, but I want to make sure that the language gives the leeway for those rules. In the case where, Mr. Bishop, thank you for all of your insight on this. In the case where a depositor drops below $1,000 and then that he cannot be contacted within that 5-day period, I would imagine there is going to be a procedure and a rule around both within the bank's operations and rules written on what to do if they cannot contact that customer. They've had this $800 balance, but there's no overdraft and no activity in that account. Somehow we need a remedy for the bank that doesn't punish the bank in that instance. Some way to encapsulate that client, some method of relief, so that because you cannot, I don't believe you can physically close that account and offload that deposit into back to the client within 5 days. So I'm concerned that there may be instances where the bank would have difficulties and be essentially punished for that type of problem.
Mr. Bishop?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope. So in the instance that, in your scenario, this happens, it would be a violation of law. So we would go in our examination, we would identify that, and we would cite an apparent violation against the bank. Now, we would handle that several different ways, depending on the seriousness of the issue and how often it happens. If it's an isolated instance, in that case, it's just a single customer, we can't be identified. We would require the bank to definitely have internal procedures as part of their policies for trying to contact that customer and correcting that violation. And if they absolutely cannot find that, then they would probably close the account and probably turn it over to unclaimed funds. Now, if this was happening rampant throughout the bank and every customer was doing this, and there was an issue with the bank not having adequate policies and procedures to monitor this, then we'd have a different supervisory issue. But it is a violation of law if they drop below that $1,000 for more than 5 days in this case, and the bank will be required to remedy that somehow. Now, we won't. I don't know if we want to be that prescriptive of how they have to remedy that. I think that's up to that individual bank. But since this is a hard statutory requirement, it's a violation if they violate it, and they have to correct it in a reasonable amount of time.
Mr. Pope, follow up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Mr. Bishop. That's what I'm concerned about, is that this is a hard violation of the law with no potential remedy in a case where you only have 5 days to contact the customer. And so when we look at this language, I'm wondering if there's language that we can put in that basically doesn't give the remedy. I agree, we don't want to be prescriptive on it, but gives gives a window to a remedy on it. And again, I'm not sure what that language would be. And I would be looking for to hear suggestions on that.
Mr. Bishop, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pope, another aspect to this is, since this is a statutory requirement, I'd say an SBDI definitely has to have this within their contract with that customer. The customer must be aware of this requirement, and they will probably include in their contract for that account remedies on how that is to be fixed. I think they'd have to include that so that the customer and the bank both know what happens in that scenario where they cannot be contacted, and it might be closing the account and moving it to unclaimed funds, something like that. But I think that's talking with the existing SBDIs, they might be able to talk about this more than I can, but that is in their existing contract language with those agreements on their customers. I think that's where that is addressed, is within that contract agreement. And then therefore the customer knows exactly what will happen if in that scenario. The bank knows what will happen and what their remedy is in that situation. So I think that's more between, like I said, the bank and the customer.
Mr. Pope, follow up?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Bishop, I guess since we're kind of on this timeline topic in this bill, is 5 days adequate, do you think, Mr. Bishop?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, 5 days. I think we took that from existing language in other areas of banking law. There's a traditional banking, there's restrictions on overdraft to bank directors, Reg O. And that one is you cannot be overdraft more than $1,000 or more for than 5 days. So I think that's where we came up with that 5 days. It's something that banks know is consistent. And if that timeline is appropriate for director overdraft at traditional banks, I think it would be appropriate for bank customers. Now, that is a little bit more arbitrary. I think we did kind of pluck that out, but that's where that came from. If an SBDI, in existence maybe has a better idea of why that might happen, then maybe we could come back and change it at a later time. But in practice, I haven't actually really seen this yet in practice. So I'm not sure how often this will happen or what those potential issues might be. This might be something we can monitor. And if we decide that 5 days is not appropriate, to come back and maybe make a change later on.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Not seeing any further questions online. The only last one, I know, I don't recall, there was a lot of discussion on it last time, so it's probably not that big an issue, but is the division comfortable with the repealers in section 2? Starting at the top of page 9.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yep, on top of page 9, repealing the majority of section 2, it's changing a little bit of that and keeping other portions of it. This is one, it's a little complicated. I think that these sections already don't apply because of, I think it's D. Basically, there's certain restrictions on depositors, including, A 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5. But then I think we input D in 2020, that if that account is related to incidental activity, which within incidental activity includes a fiat deposit, that these factors don't apply. So I already think they don't apply. This just kind of removes that confusion.
Okay. Ready for the discussion, members, before we open up to public comment?
No public comment.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. Obviously, please do stick around. So is there any public comment on this specific topic item? First, we'll go in the room. Is there anybody from the public? Not seeing any. Let's go online. Ms. Fellows, are you still with us? If so, do you have a strong opinion on this one?
I am still here and I do not.
Okay. Clear that up. Anybody else online? I don't think we're.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Rutar, are you online and can you hear us? And do you have any testimony on this specific topic?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. Good to see you again. Please
Yeah,
proceed.
likewise.
All right, first, introduce yourself first and proceed.
Yes, Trevor Rutar, CEO of Kraken Financial. I've heard the testimony this morning. I think Julie did a great job of outlining our needs. And then specifically with this bill, our preference would be to eliminate the requirement from law and maybe grant the commissioner the rulemaking authority to put these in place. We, as a financial institution, already have these in our policies and procedures and the contracts with clients. So the proposal is reasonable and it provides the flexibility that we would require.
Ms. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rutar, so your suggestion then is rather than having that 1,000 in statute, leave it up to rule and regulation. And that would also take off the depositors shall not be deemed in violation if they have it for less than 5 or more consecutive days. That the one thing that might be a struggle for the commissioner would be to provide for that second paragraph, which really doesn't make sense out of context. And through rule, I think it may be a struggle to say this isn't a violation of law where we can say that. And that's one of the advantages, I think, to having it. What are your thoughts on that nuance?
Mr. Rutar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I see the conundrum. Because we definitely want to eliminate any risk of dropping below zero or an overdraft situation or extension of credit. And so for the rules to be able to jive with the law would be required to be carefully considered. I think as the committee has proposed it this morning, we think it's a reasonable accommodation and it provides that flexibility we would need to get any client back to $1,000 should they drop below it.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thanks. And you know, this bill has a long ways through the process yet, so we can work that language if there's a better way to do it. But that's obviously the intent, is to make sure that we're not dinging anyone as a violation of law when they're doing their best to be consistent with law. And we've just written the law in a way that's very restrictive, so we have to be thoughtful about it. Thank you for that. Second question, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Going back to Ms. Fellow's suggestion of maybe putting together a little group to talk through ideas on how to promote our speedies better and find ways to increase our communications around the country. Is that something that's appealing to Kraken Financial as well?
Mr. Rutar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, yes, it is. I think there's a lot of ideas that we could come to the table of ways that we can promote the SPDI, educate other states who don't maybe understand it, explain the regulatory framework that we have in place and how we are examined. The working group putting that together would certainly help promote this industry forward and get some of that understanding that is lacking at in some other states or jurisdictions.
Great. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Is there Senator Furphy, do you have a question or are you just appearing on our screen? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused about this, but let me just clarify this issue. In banking, where we had a situation where we could not overdraft an account and the customer writes checks, we simply returned the checks, and it would be the customer's responsibility for dealing with whoever they wrote the check to. But we did have situations where you could not create overdrafts. So I'd just like to clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Furphy, for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
One of the challenges there at this point in time, though, is that with debit cards, you can't seem to shut it off. And honestly, that's a challenge. I literally tried. We got debit cards for my kids, and I said, I want zero overdraft protection. I want absolute denial. If it bounces, it should just come up as declined. And the institution said, yeah, that's not possible. We can't do that. So they have overdraft protection against my my better judgment. So I think with checks you can bounce it nicely, but with debit cards, the money goes out. I don't know quite how to deal with that. So it could become a challenge, but appreciate that consideration, Senator Furphy. Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman, are you unintentionally giving me parenting advice so when I have kids to not take overdraft protection?
If you can get to that point at that, you've got a little time before before you need that feature, and I would like to see that feature implemented.
Representative Singh, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Mr. Rutar. Am I saying that correctly? Okay, thank you, Mr. Rutar. So with the analogy that was just made to a a credit or a debit card transaction, what kind of transactions are being done with Speedy Bank institutions?
Mr. Utar, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative. We offer two products. One is a deposit product, which would be addressed here, and then we also offer digital asset custody. So for fiat deposits, it's just wire movement in and out of the banking account that we have. Clients want to move in and out of positions within crypto, and they have a fiat account that allows them to be able to do so. It's done via wire, so that is one of the mechanisms that we have in place to prevent overdrafts. And then digital asset custody. If clients own currency and they don't want to self-custody it, we will provide a custody solution via the bank.
Representative Singh, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rutar, what would a overdraft even look like in this situation?
Mr. Rutar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because it's in statute that it can't happen, we prevent it from happening.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Singh, any follow up? Mr. Co-Chairman.
I was just going to ask if my kids can get a debit card on that account.
Not yet. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, it is something on the radar, but debit cards is not something that we currently offer.
Thanks. Keep me posted.
Members, any further questions for Mr. Rutar? Not seeing any. We certainly appreciate your time. You know, Kraken has been with us since day one and pushing for this legislation. We really appreciate your dedication to this issue.
Thank you all. We appreciate your efforts in this space as well.
Absolutely. I don't think is there any other online comments? Seeing none. One last call for anybody in the room or we close public comment. All right, seeing none, public comment has closed. Mr. Co-Chairman.
So, Mr. Chairman, as we discussed, I think maybe prior to going online, this is legislation that needs to go to the Minerals Committee. Minerals has their next meeting at the end of July.
I think it's the 30th and 31st.
Yeah, and then another meeting
in November.
Or end of October, I think this year. Usually it's November, but I think it might be end of October. So I guess the question is, do we feel like we're not going to need any more changes in this bill and want to move it forward for the July meeting, which we probably can't get on the agenda for, although I don't know if that's been finalized. Is it finalized? Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, so if that's the case, we could wait until our September meeting to finalize this bill or bills if we want to break it into two, which it sounds like our LSO is recommending that we break it into two bills for
I
two
think
topics considering.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Minerals calendar. So they're meeting on the 8th and 9th of October. So the good news is that even if we need to keep this one teed up for September, we've got some time there. And I think as long as we're in consultation with the Minerals chairs, we could probably have them hopefully fit on the agenda somewhere, especially if we start working with them now.
Yeah, we could send them a little letter / note now to expect either one or two bills.
I mean, I'm comfortable with unless anybody says otherwise. I'm fine with taking action on this now, but we can also leave it open until September.
I think it's in good shape, and there's nothing that would preclude us if we had an emergency action in September from just taking some additional action.
Right.
But it's probably good to clean some things off our agenda.
Yeah, especially for the stampede. So committee members, do you guys have any angst with this bill as it currently sits? Is anybody online?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Representative Singh, please.
I don't believe the bill has been moved yet, but I would want to make
it has
We're
not
just
been
talking about it.
And
Mr. Chairman, we can't sponsor the bill. So when the time is right, we'll have a motion potentially to
To forward it,
to
yeah.
forward it to the Minerals Committee for sponsorship is the way we'll do that motion when it's the appropriate time.
So I guess absent any,
See,
Representative Singh,
Rep.
did you want to chime in?
Is
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I just wanted to say that it makes more sense to dispose of it now, just to get it on Minerals' plate earlier rather than later.
I think it makes sense. Well, committee?
Yeah.
Let's, Mr. Co-Chairman,
Mr.
please.
Chairman, I think the only thing to decide then, and you know, what are your thoughts? I'm inclined to split it into the two bills. We have the time, and I don't think that causes us any problems.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I have no problem with that either, so long as it's not going to take up additional time in Minerals. I know they've kind of got a packed committee. Obviously, we've got the oil and gas bonding issue, which is
Yeah.
pretty significant. So there's a heavy workload there. That would be my only thought if we split it into two, is that they can make sure to handle. I think Senator Furphy, you want to chime in?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that it should be in two bills. Personally, they're two separate issues there. So that's my opinion. Thanks.
Kind of sounds like the committee's leaning towards just breaking this up into two separate bills, which I think is perfectly fine.
Well,
Let's
Mr.
start
Chairman,
with
with that, then I'll move to divide this into its two separate bills and then forward those bills to the Minerals Committee for consideration for sponsorship.
And just for clarification, Mr. Co-Chairman, where do you want that delineation to be? Mr. Hopkinson?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's fairly clear if we just say that, you know, the conversion to a public trust would be one bill, and then the other speedy amendments would
Okay.
be in separate.
You guys are, Mr. Hopkinson, you're good with that? Okay. So a motion has been made to separate in the two separate bills and forward it to the Minerals Committee for further deliberation. Is there a second on the motion? It has been seconded. Any further discussion on the measures or the motion? See, for two separate bills, correct. Seeing none, LSO, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 25 LSO 28 Special Purpose Depository Institutions Amendments. Senator Ellis? Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator Nethercott?
Aye.
Representative Andrew? Representative Singh?
No.
Representative Yin?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss?
Aye.
Chairman Western?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, we have 7 ayes, 1 no.
Excellent. So on to the next topic on our agenda. I think we're Mr. Co-Chair, my thought is we're not at our 10:30 break. Maybe we just get this one kicked off and we can resume after the break if that's okay with you.
Let's do that.
Okay. So the next agenda item is Bill Draft 25 LSO 0090, Defense of State Banking. Mr. Hopkinson, would you mind just coming forward and walking the committee through the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 25 LSO 90, working draft 0.4. This draft comes before the committee based on the request from the last meeting, which was kind of a broad thought bill draft. So what's in this bill draft is certainly not set in stone by any means, and open for discussion, as all bill drafts are. But I just wanted to make that clear. I would also note up front, this does go into Title 13, so this would need to go to Minerals because it does impact Title 13. So the bill draft then, titled Defense of State Banking, would create a new article in 13.1.901 titled Defense of State Banking, and has 2 subsections. The first subsection is just legislative findings. And on page 2 there, paragraph 1, just as a finding by the legislature, essentially just to summarize that the dual banking system has existed since the Federal National Banking Act, that current regulatory structure has a state agency from each state that serves as a chartering authority and primary regulator, and that the system has allowed individual states to be responsive to the banking needs of their citizens and allowed for a variety of new products and services over the years. And that the dual banking system has tended to mitigate the tendency of regulators to stifle innovation and restrict new entrants into the banking industry. But recent events suggest that may no longer be the case. That's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 finds that in order for the dual banking system to succeed, state and nationally chartered banks must be fairly treated under the law without undue regard to their origin, political inclinations, or other concerns beyond the explicit scope of the law. Paragraph 3 provides that the state of Wyoming has an interest in ensuring that its laws authorizing state chartered banks are given due consideration by other states and the United States, and that Wyoming chartered state banks are treated fairly by other regulatory entities. And then the real meat of the bill is subsection B. This is where anything that happens. And it just provides that the Attorney General shall investigate any allegation of disparate treatment of a Wyoming state chartered bank by federal or other state regulators. The Attorney General shall take any available action to defend Wyoming's interest in the dual banking system and its interest in ensuring that similarly situated Wyoming state chartered banks are fairly treated by other regulatory authorities in the same manner as a nationally chartered or other state chartered bank. And the bill would be effective July 1st, 2025. And with that, I'd stand for any questions on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkinson. Committee members, certainly refresh your memories a little bit. This is very much so a 10th Amendment bill, right? The dual banking system goes back since before the Civil War, since long before Wyoming was even a state, and the ability of states to have their own banking system regulated by the states. And I am certainly of the opinion that there are some in DC who are just feel the system is either antiquated, not necessary, however you want to frame it. I think we'll continue to be borderline outright hostile to the dual banking system and for our rights to regulate our banks as we see fit. I mean, I think by and large, the Division of Banking does a pretty quality job, especially given their lack of resources regulating a lot of these community banks that lend and make the wheels turn in our local economy. So that's kind of the background here. And obviously this was part of the discussion that we had last time in Jackson, if you'll recall. So there's a little bit of detail just as a refresher. Is there any questions for Mr. Hopkinson on this particular bill draft or wording in the committee? I don't think we're seeing any online. We're supposed to take a break at 10:30, which is about 12 minutes. So Ms. Co-Chairman, my thought was we can start public comment, rise out of it and come back in if that's okay, or do you have a strong opinion either way?
Break now and then do public comment.
Sure. I guess for continuity of discussion, we're gonna take a break a little bit early. Let's just say 15 minutes. So at 10:35, we'll come back in for public comment on this issue. Okay, folks, so we are back from a short coffee break. We were on, also just explain or kind of walked us through our defense of state banking. And was there any questions for Mr. Hopkinson? Last minute, not seeing any. And we were moving on to public testimony on this one. Is there anybody, please,
Let's get our
let's have the
agency.
top brass himself come on up. Yeah. Mr. Bishop, please proceed.
There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah Bishop, Banking Commissioner with the Division of Banking. For this bill, I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on our unique position. At the last committee, I think one of the directives was for LSO to work with the Division of Banking on drafting this. And we unfortunately had to tell LSO that we can't really help as much on this one as we usually do. And I just wanted to put this on the table, explain our position and the reason why. Normally, like, we have a very good working relationship, not only this committee, but LSO and the entire legislature. And we absolutely are more than helpful to work on anything that, achieves a common goal. And this one, it does overlap with one of my actual statutory requirements of my job to promote the dual banking system. However, as the regulator, I am in a bit of a unique situation when it comes to the state entering into any litigation with other regulators. So I'll start with both federal and state regulators, which this addresses.
Please proceed.
So for example, the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, that was the subject of a lot of the discussion at the last meeting. We share supervision with our traditional banks with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. We have a written agreement with them on shared supervision. We accept their exams, they accept ours. And of our 21 traditional banks, 16 of them are member banks, and the remaining 5, most of them also have holding companies that are also supervised by the Federal Reserve. So we work very closely with them, but we also understand we have our goal to promote the dual banking system. But worst case scenario, there's a litigations filed by the state against the Federal Reserve Bank. They come to me and say, we can't honor that agreement. Therefore, we have to conduct examinations. They have to conduct theirs, and we cannot accept theirs, and vice versa. If that were to happen, our traditional banks would then be examined twice as often as they currently are. That's very costly to them. So I understand the legislature and the governor's office and AG has wants to promote and protect this charter, as do I. And absolutely, I'm not saying anything against this by any means. I'm just saying I have to have a different approach since that directive, the last meeting did include us. So because of that potential worst case scenario, that would actually harm the dual banking system if I can't work with the Federal Reserve, even though there's ongoing litigation. Because our banks, traditional banks that may not even be subject to that litigation, they're going to have to be examined, like I said, twice as often as they currently are. That makes them, the national charter, much more attractive because they'd only be examined half as much if they were to convert. So from that perspective, it would actually harm the dual banking system. Now, if litigation were to be filed, and I can say the Division of Banking, we're independent from this. We're not involved in this. We understand the state's protecting its interests, and that's fine. But we continue to work with the Federal Reserve. They can agree to work with us regardless of what else is going on. That's the best case scenario. We've done this before. A year ago, the state made a motion to intervene. That's the conversation I had to have. Was we need to continue to work together. They were receptive. But it is a bit of a unique situation that I do want to put on public record as to make sure everyone keeps that in mind. The other one is other states. Part of this is other states' involvement with our, chartered institutions. We don't have a lot of shared supervision with our traditional banks or SPDIs on the bank side, but we do on a non-bank side, money transmitters, mortgage lenders. SPDIs will have to get money transmitter licenses in some states. So we absolutely have shared supervision with those other states. And it's a similar conversation. We have to remain independent from any type of litigation against those states, because we do need to work with them on ongoing supervision of other entities that may not be, again, impacted by the subject of whatever litigation may happen. And also just as a regulator, we do have to remain independent, basically from our entities as well. When we go in and they say there's a litigation ongoing, we have to be independent and be able to make judgment calls on the impact of that litigation to safety and soundness. That's hard to do when we're also involved. So we really have to draw the line, I think, a very distinct line between the Attorney General's office and other executive branches and the Division of Banking, because we really have to remain independent from all this. I'll definitely help however we can. So I'm happy to provide any information as far as how banking works, how regulation works, how our shared supervision with these other entities work. Make sure everything is factually correct. But I did want to put out there why we weren't as helpful as we usually are. I definitely want to be, but from a strategic standpoint, this one we're in a unique situation. And I did want to put that on the record just for your awareness and answer any questions.
Mr. Co-Chairman, you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'll say, we appreciate that concern and the caution that you're taking is certainly very appropriate. Commend you for that thoughtfulness. Is there anything, and I guess this is a little bit of a catch-22, but we want to make sure that this bill is reflective of your need to continue those relationships and maintain that independence. I don't see anything in the B paragraph that would prohibit you from maintaining that independence appropriately. Is there anything else we can do to strengthen it? Or do you have specific concerns? Please let us know.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. There's nothing in here, I think, that crosses over that line. It really was the directive that we help on this. Happy to help as much as I can, but I do, being on the record that, like I said, maybe not as much as normal, but no, I agree. I don't see anything in this bill that would kind of cross that line, that would keep us from having those working relationships with other regulators. Hopefully, if any litigation's filed, the other party is as open as we are. I have no reason to doubt that. If so, there's nothing I can do about that, but we'll do our best to make sure that doesn't happen. But no, I don't see anything concerning with this actual draft.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Great, thanks. No, I'm good.
Mr. Bishop, so just to make sure I understand correctly, part of your reason you have to kind of keep at arm's length with this piece of legislation is given the nature of your supervisory role in the Kansas City's supervisory role with some of these banks that can put you in a difficult position. Am I fairly summarizing one of your concerns or one of your reasons?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, yes, you are. I mean, like I said, we have shared supervision with traditional banks and hopefully Speedies at some point with the Kansas Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So we need to make sure that, we continue to work with them amicably.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Just to clarify something that was said, Mr. Bishop, and I think I probably misunderstood you, that there was an implication that the state defending our state charter might damage the state in some way. And I don't think that's what you meant at any point. I think you just meant that you need to maintain your independence for the relationship. But that's independent from the defense by the state. Is that accurate?
Mr. Bishop,
yes,
please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yes, I believe what you said is accurate. It is more that we need to make sure that nothing overflows and impacts unrelated institutions that we share supervision with.
Gotcha. Okay. Just want to clarify that. Thank you.
That's how we can protect that dual banking system, is making sure that our traditional banks are not affected by anything unless it's, directly related to their activity. If we, this is all banks, not just Speedies. This is everything chartered or licensed in Wyoming. So it could also be in defense of our community banks. But in this scenario that we're, protecting the SBEI charter, which I agree with, we wanted to make sure that that does not overflow and have a negative impact on any other institution that's not related to the Speedy.
Right.
Right.
Understood. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, we just want to make sure we're all on board with defending our precious dual banking system. Committee members, is there any questions for the director, or was there any online? Not seeing any. I guess just hang tight, of course, per usual.
Thank you.
Were there any other state agencies in the room that want to testify, or anybody else? Mr. Meyer, or please. Is that one not
That one
working?
doesn't like you, Scott.
There we go.
you
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Scott Meyer, on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. I guess we got to make sure that Mr. Bishop doesn't play with any more toys. With regard to this defense of state banking bill, I would tell you that I'm not sure that this is ready for prime time. There's a lot of things in here that make me scratch my head and say, I'm not sure what we're doing or how we're going to do it. I understand why you're doing it and what have you, but the comment, I think, or the statement that's under on page 2, starting with lines 16 and 17, recent events suggest this may no longer be the case. I'm not sure I would agree with that, but understanding that there's some litigation and some things going out there, I see where the committee's looking at it. But if you look over on page 3 on subsection B, the Attorney General shall investigate any allegation of desperate treatment. I'm thinking, by whom? Who makes that, and who makes that determination? And then you go on down there on line 13, it says, the Attorney General shall take any available action. What if what if your state community banks don't like the way the CFPB is issuing its rules and regulations that's affecting our banks? What if we don't like the way federal regulations talk about who we can do loans to and how we do that? I told you that we're part of, all the community banks have the obligation to, that they adhere to the Community Reinvestment Act. What if that's more difficult in Wyoming than it is in other states? Does that mean that we talk to the Attorney General and say, sue those guys? Pretty soon we're suing them over everything. This is so big and so broad that I think you're opening yourself up to a can of worms that you don't want to get into. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions, but I think this is not quite ready for prime time.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you. So Scott, this is the first time the bill's been released, and obviously this is the committee meeting when we're looking for feedback with specifics of how can we make it better. This is a bill that would provide support for the community that you represent, and provide circumstances, for example, that you laid out where there would be some potential recourse to go to the state and say, hey, we're being treated unfairly. We'd appreciate some state help in this. And this bill is trying to establish an authority for the state to then step in the circumstances you describe. So, rather than just criticism, what are some solutions?
Mr. Meyer.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Co-Chairman, I would look at this and say, I'm not sure, but the language of shall, maybe that needs to be more of a may. Let the Attorney General decide whether the Attorney General's office needs to get involved with that. And then maybe by whom, maybe it has to be not, I don't know by whom, but maybe it has to be more specific. Who can make those allegations? Who can make those determinations? Is that going to be only customers? Is that going to be shareholders? Is that going to be, people that think that they're deprived of a loan? I don't know. I just think that at some point in time, I have to know by who can make those allegations. And that's where I think we need to have a little bit more specificity. And then, like I said, down there on line 13, shall take any available action. I don't know what that means either. And I don't know how to, I can say this doesn't sound good. I don't know how I'm going to fix that, but I think it has to be any reasonable action, because I don't know, you don't want to put the Attorney General in such a position that they have to take an action that is not reasonable. So I think those are so broad there that you're going to open up this can of worms. You're going to go down a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. So that's my only comments.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and again, Mr. Meyer, I feel like this is an opportunity where providing some constructive ideas on alternative language would be really more useful than just, I don't like this bill either. Because it does provide opportunity for the community that you represent to have some more standing if they do see a problem. So I guess I would just ask, and we're not going to take action on this today. This will be one where we wanted some continued discussion and wanted feedback and an opportunity to visit, since it's the first time it's been seen and it's only been available for a short time. But, perhaps for next time, we'd ask if you'd visit with your community and say, all right, well, what would make this a bill that we could really get behind?
Right.
And I don't think just criticizing the language is overly vague is helpful in that circumstance, Mr. Chairman. So if you could do that for next time, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, I certainly appreciate, you have an interest for your members, and I respect that you're dedicated to, to looking after those interests. I do think, though, regardless of the digital bank component of this, I do worry that the tone and tenor of regulators in DC has steadily been growing. Maybe dismissive is the right word. I'm not sure what the correct adjective is, but I have shown maybe less deference or respect towards this really important banking system that we've had around, for over 150 years. And so I would think that if we can continue to refine this, again, this is just kind of a first iteration. That's why we have these committee meetings, so we can kind of have that dialogue to kind of get towards a product that we can build some consensus on. That we can send that message that this is something that's important to us, that's important to everybody, whether it's some of the newcomers we've seen, some of the traditional players in the space, to ensure that we have this component. Again, I think the 10th Amendment is really important here, that these states' rights, whether it be on the traditional flash button stuff, or whether it's some of this stuff that might be more boring like banking, are respected. I think it's a really important thing to me. I think to a lot of folks that principle is respected. Is this language perfect? I think that's part of this discussion. Are there improvements? Probably. But I think that's something that I would certainly be interested in hearing, Mr. Martin, is there a way we can get to a point where this does what we intended to, but also ensures that we're not taking on any unintended risks or vulnerabilities? So if you have any ideas, we'd love to hear them.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, and I will echo, I think, some of the comments that the State Banking Commissioner brought up on how we work together. I don't think any of my members are thrilled with any kind of intervention necessarily from the federal government at all. But the reality is that we work very well with the federal regulators. And so we don't see this quite the same way that you do. That's why I say I'm not sure I agree that they may not have that they don't have the respect for us that maybe they used to. I don't think that I see that at all. We do work hand in hand with federal regulators as long as the state regulators. So we don't have those same issues. Do I think that you can add some guardrails onto this stuff, especially that last paragraph? I do. I think that we can do that, and we can certainly offer our constructive criticisms or suggestions or whatever that goes into that. That's fine. But I think the general feeling is that I'm not sure that this bill is even necessary because we don't see that. You folks see that, or you maybe in the digital world see that. We don't see that. And so we work with those regulators. We work with the feds and the states, both of them, day in and day out.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
So just to clarify, your organization does not represent any of the speedy banks?
Mr. Meyer.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Your organization does not represent the speedy banks?
We do not, Mr. Chairman.
In any way, okay. So
Mr.
perhaps,
Co-Chairman, please.
Mr. Chairman, then perhaps what we can try and do as the next step is find a way that we can be more specific so that perhaps this bill doesn't provide any protections for the banks that you represent and really just carves it out for the speedies. If that's what you'd find preferable, bring that back as a suggestion, and we can try and find some language that would very specifically carve it out to preclude you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't take that approach out there, and I don't think that that's correct. I'm not saying that we don't think we ought to have protection. What I'm saying is I'm not sure this bill does that. And I don't think that this bill is made to do whatever you think it is going to do. And that's just our opinion. We look at it, we say, this is fine. This is all a feel good bill, but it doesn't do anything that you want it to do, or else it opens up a huge can of worms that you don't even expect it to do. So I'm not sure that this bill is in the answer to anybody.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Ellis, please.
I think with the two microphones on there, there's a little bit of a echo feedback. If you could turn one off, thank you.
Just stand
Oh, I
by
think,
for, we've got some technical help on the
one
way.
sec. Please stand by.
Yeah. Technical difficulties.
Thank you.
Senator, did you have oh, Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
All right. Well, I guess the one final question is the testimony just now was this isn't going to do anything and this is going to open a whole can of worms and do too much.
Mr. Meyer?
I don't understand how those can both be true.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, what I'm saying is I don't know that this bill does anything. If it does do something, it opens up a whole can of worms that maybe nobody wants to do, but I'm not sure that this bill is necessary because banks can already sue if they have to sue. They do sue through other means if they think they're over-regulated or if they're not being applied consistently. So this bill doesn't provide them with anything other than maybe saying, by the way, we're going to get the Attorney General involved, but I don't know the Attorney General is going to be doing everything that the banks want them to do. And I'm not sure this bill does that.
So,
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, to reflect on what we talked about last time, banks certainly have that opportunity at this point in time. This piece of legislation is specifically providing a clear vehicle for the state to have standing to bring suit on behalf of our dual banking system to protect particularly a lot of the recent work we've been doing that has struggled and demonstrate that it's a state interest, not just a bank interest to proceed with that. So that's the intent of this legislation. And again, it would be, in my opinion, positive if that were protective of all of our state chartered banks. But that's something that we can contemplate if that's not desired. Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Committee members, anybody online? Any questions for
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Meyer? Representative Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was an interesting perspective that I hadn't previously thought about, Chairman Rothfuss, that the government is making more of a historical statement in support of the state banking system, which it sounds like a good thing. It sounds good. So I guess I'd like to hear Mr. Meyer's opinion on that.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I didn't understand the question.
Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me rephrase. This piece of potential legislation that we have right here could potentially serve as a historical statement from the state of Wyoming in support of the banking system. Would that be a beneficial statement or tool to the system at large for us to help protect the system that we care about?
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Singh, I guess if we're trying to make a statement, then that's fine. Maybe that's better done through a resolution. I don't know. I look at it and just say, I'm not sure where we are going with this thing, but it's, and I know what the intent is, but I just don't know that this is the right vehicle.
Mr. Meyer, do you think that federal regulators strike the perfect balance and not being too heavy-handed and are fair and equitable in administration of their regulations?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of anything where they're not being fair and equitable with respect to the community banks. And I guess, Mr. Chairman, the question is, how are you defining the federal regulators? If you're talking about the Federal Reserve, if you're talking about FDIC, if you're talking about the CFPB, I think that there's a lot of areas there that could be done much better.
Well, Mr. Meyer, would you mind maybe, is it the CFPB that's a concern to some of these members, or could you touch on that a little bit, please?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that the CFPB has been wading into every little thing that every bank that the community banks have been doing, whether it's charging fees or whether it's credit card applications or anything. And they get to the point where you say, geez, do we need to fight back with this? And banks do fight back with the CFPB. I don't know whether this would open up the door to allow the state to go in there and fight on that behalf or not. I don't know. I just think it's an area that doesn't seem typical that you would get any more traction from the Wyoming Attorney General than you would from anybody else that's already filing suits.
And Mr. Meyer, I think that it kind of touches on, I think, the principle that we've been talking about here and my co-chairman is that, you know, whether it's issues specifically with the Federal Reserve, Kansas City branch, CFPB, the FDIC, any of these federal agencies, it's getting at the root of it, whether it's through the specific dual banking component of federal regulation or the dozens, hundreds of other ways that they do regulate community banks. It's the principle at large of this system and the core tenet of what enables it, which is the dual banking system that I think is of concern. If I'm hearing my concerns and certainly of my co-chairman. Mr. Co-chairman, please.
So, you know, following up on this discussion and the statement that you're not aware that there are any concerns by any of the community banks, I'm taking that. And so I'll ask if I'm interpreting this correctly. Am I interpreting it correctly that our community banks are comfortable with the debanking of businesses related to both digital assets, for example, but also for firearms that we see around the country right now and in the state?
Mr. Meyer, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, no, you can't take that from there. The comment is that I'm not aware of anything right now that has done specifically, but if you point out something, maybe there is. But my point is that I don't think that.
So
Mr. Co-Chairman.
is the debanking, is that not happening? Were we misinformed on debanking of institutions that relate to cryptocurrency, firearms, and other assets? Is that not happening?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any of that's happening right now in Wyoming.
Okay. Mr.
Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, well, that's good to hear that Wyoming has some immunity from that. Mr. Chairman, what about the travel rule? That was a contentious and is a contentious provision, changing the Bank Secrecy Act, providing additional requirements for tracking of information, tracking of funds in banks. It is my assumption then also that community banks in the state of Wyoming are supportive of those changes to the Bank Secrecy Act that such as the travel rule. Is that an accurate interpretation of your discussion?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's not accurate.
Okay. Then when you say there's been no problems with federal regulations and requirements, I guess I'm missing what you mean by there are no problems.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Mr.
Meyer.
Co-Chairman, I said, I am not aware. I'm not saying that there's no problems out there, but I'm not aware of anything that has been brought to my attention that this has been a huge problem in Wyoming. I'm not aware of it. Now, I have a couple of bankers that are sitting behind me, and maybe they have disagreements. I'm not aware of any right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Good.
Committee members online. Representative Ewing or Senator Nethercott. Not seeing any hands raised. Well, let's please do stick around just in case we want to call you back up, and we'll open up to further public comment. Is there anybody else in the room that wants to weigh in? Is there anybody online? Okay, please do admit her.
Zoom in. Oh, no.
Ms. Long, can you hear us? Sounds like you've been admitted.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I did not
Ms.
raise
Long?
my hand to speak, but I'm happy to speak if you would like me to.
But by all means, please introduce yourself and who you're with.
Mr. Chairman, Caitlin Long, CEO of Custodia Bank. 2 comments. First of all, we have been debanked multiple times. There is absolutely a problem with debanking in Wyoming. And if the traditional banks think they are immune to that, Godspeed. They are not. Second point is that I just saw this draft bill yesterday. I do think that one thing that would be helpful in the next draft of it is a statement of the state's harm in the deference that federal regulators are trying to force the states to federal regulators. And that in particular, the loss of revenue to the state and the cost that has been spent by the Wyoming Division of Banking in supporting the state banking system should be added somewhere to the bill to ensure that standing is recognized in the event that the Attorney General's office does proceed with litigation to defend the state bank charters. Standing is something that litigators should speak on. I'm not a litigator, but just in general, it's not enough to have a statement of interest. There also has to be a demonstration of harm. And so I would suggest that some language be added to that to ensure that there is a demonstration of not just interest, but also harm to the state from the federal regulators intervening and trying to create a veto over the things that are done by the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Long. I think that standing component of that discussion is really important, and getting clarity is needed. Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Long, thanks for those specific points. I think that's a good set of suggestions. The A provision, the intent there obviously is to start working towards standing, and I see that not only including an interest, but including a specific harm is going to go a long ways towards that. And this is going to be subject to, additional consideration, I think, between now and our next meeting. So if you have further ideas that come up, please email those and contact us and let us know of additional ways that we might be able to strengthen that establishment of the connection of the state's interest with the dual banking system. So thanks for that testimony, and look forward to more discussion on this.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
Ms.
Chairman.
Long. Any questions for Ms. Long from the committee members? Not seeing any. Thank you very much, Ms. Long, for your testimony. It's appreciated. Anybody else in the room before we close? Yeah, Ms. Wisniewski, please. Again, if you wouldn't mind, just committee protocol. I know it's kind of arduous, but just state your name if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Good morning, Senator Rothfuss, Representative Western Commission or committee members. My name is Maggie Wisniewski. I'm a Sheridan resident. A question, I don't know how to, the protocol, I kind of messed that up yesterday. Directed to Ms. Long. She said that debunking does happen in Wyoming. I'm just wondering, she said it happened to her bank. Can she clarify what type of bank she is?
So Ms. Wisniewski, usually it's if you have testimony come forward and the committee can ask you questions about that testimony, you can reach out. I think all of her contact information is available. You can reach out privately, but usually the format is you have testimony. We can ask you questions about your testimony.
Okay.
She's not on the committee. So if you have a question if you have a statement for the committee, we'd be more than happy to hear it. And if we have questions, we'll certainly ask them.
Okay, then maybe I should rephrase that. The debanking in Wyoming, would that be, I guess, the dual banking, is it the traditional community banks or is it the newer services? It would be my question. Do any of you have any knowledge of that?
Mr. Co-Chairman?
For questions, we can follow up offline afterwards and have that chat. I think we are aware of some of it, but again, as the chairman said, the format is really for us to ask you as a witness test questions as opposed to for you as the witness to ask us questions. That's more of what we do during the coffee breaks and have that type of discussion. But if you have any testimony and you want to provide your thoughts and views on this bill, that's what we would love to hear from you.
Okay, good enough. All right. Thanks so much. I'll look forward to some clarification on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see, is there anybody else in the room online? Going once, going twice. Public comment is closed. Committee members, obviously there's been some interesting chatter on this bill. I mean, I want to emphasize this is based off some of our discussions that went down in our May meeting, as you may recall. And given the concerns that certainly we've had about the potential direction of where this conversation could go and its implications on the dual banking system. So that's just a little additional background. So now it's in the committee's directive. Mr. Co-Chairman, do you want to weigh in?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think there were a couple of suggestions that I think we should look at for next time as and I believe it's prudent for us to keep working this draft and get more input and move it to the next meeting. One was the question on page 3, lines 10 through 12, basically, of who would be able to provide that allegation. I think that is a point that we might want to refine a little bit, where that allegation would need to be narrowed to a Wyoming entity at a minimum, and then give some thought to whether that means a Wyoming financial institution has the capacity to do that. And that's probably about where we want to land. But I'm not certain of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe, and I guess I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but financial institutions that are regulated in part by the state banking division or other ones. I know some of the state banks, there's a couple that have OCC charters. We want to make sure that they're included as well.
Yeah.
But that's kind of just from a wordsmithing perspective, that can be a starting point.
Yeah, I think something along those lines is the appropriate way for us to do it. So working on some language there, and that might be one where getting some language from the commissioner, although I know the commissioner is looking to remain a little bit apart from this piece of legislation, but trying to work on language so that we have the right class of entities that would be able to make those allegations, so that it's not just anybody making that allegation is prudent.
Yeah, I think that was, Mr. Co-Chair, was that a motion or?
Well, a suggestion without objection. I don't know if anybody has any concerns about that or wants to weigh in, but
I guess we can do it. If there's objections, we want to hear them. Otherwise, we can just include that before we
or
take
any
action at our next
discussion or
meeting.
anything.
Yeah, is there any discussion? Committee members, not seeing any online. So,
And
Mr. Co-Chairman.
And if there's no discussion on that, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think adding another section in non-codified law that lays out the harms that the state finds to establish standing, that's consistent with Ms. Long's suggestions, would be appropriate. I suggest non-codified, and I think that is appropriate for this circumstance, because what we have in the A section will remain appropriate and true for the foreseeable future and are not a specific fact set of circumstances. So that seems appropriate for a green book.
Yeah.
A set of specific circumstances is probably not appropriate for green book, but certainly would be an important part of establishing the state's interest and standing for any intervention. So adding what would then be a section 2 of non-codified statute, where we work with stakeholders to try and put together some new language that does establish what are the costs to the state of putting all of this together, what are the impacts to the state of not having our dual banking system appropriately recognized, those types of things that are a little more fact specific based on today, and working up that section for next time, I think would be a useful addition. So those are the two things that I think would strengthen this based on the testimony.
Committee members, any discussion on the suggestions?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the comments we received. I don't think there's harm in adding a statement about our interests, but I just don't think we, as a legislature, we can't declare we have an interest. That's something the courts are going to determine ultimately. So
Certainly.
I think we include it. We're trying to make a bit of a statement on this, but just,
Right.
Realization that there are limits that we can't legislate ourselves standing.
Of course. Of course.
We keep trying.
We can sure try. Is there anybody online that has their hand raised? Marissa, okay. So absent any objection, let's include those edits for a September meeting. And so absent any, or is there any further discussion on the bill?
No, I think
I don't think so. So with that objection, we're going to forward this on to our September meeting for further discussion, where there will be a final vote on the measure. So let's see what it is.
it's time for a break.
11:15, and we're,
Master account.
yeah, a little bit behind schedule. That's okay.
These will be faster.
So yeah, let's move on to our next topic, which is the consideration of obtaining a master account for the state of Wyoming. I think we do have a memo, if you guys wouldn't mind. I also wouldn't mind coming forward. Just as a little background, this was something we discussed at the previous meeting with some of the issues that some of these entities are facing and how a potential option, again, potential, and that's why we're having this discussion, is having a master account with the state, whether it be the treasurer's office or other entities, that are state entities. So Clarissa, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Clarissa Nord with LSO. Mr. Chairman, I'll review the memo before you today regarding the Federal Reserve Master Accounts Overview. This is Appendix 14-01. Mr. Chairman, as you stated, this was prepared in response to the Select Committee's request at the May meeting. And so for this memo, we look at how other states maintain a master account with the Fed. We provide just a brief overview of the Fed master accounts and payment system. And then we summarize the background and structure of 2 state-owned trust companies with direct access to the Fed. So, Mr. Chairman, for this first portion of the memo, I'm happy to answer any questions. I certainly won't reiterate that information, as y'all are fairly familiar with that process, but again, happy to answer any questions. And I'm sure there's folks in the room and online who can provide additional information as well. So, Mr. Chairman, jumping into the states for Texas and Tennessee, the Texas Legislature and Tennessee General Assembly, they previously authorized state-owned trust companies that maintain direct access to the Fed. And it appears that Texas, their account structure is relatively unique among states. Tennessee, they previously secured services directly from the Fed, but their trust was decommissioned in 2017. And so just wanted to quickly note, while Texas, their specific framework appears to be fairly uncommon, other states do employ different mechanisms. So, and this is just one example, but the Bank of North Dakota, they're the only state-owned bank in the country. And I can certainly provide additional information per the committee's request, but they do have a business relationship with the Minneapolis Fed. So for Texas, jumping into their particular trust, in 1986, the legislature authorized the incorporation of the trust, and this provides the state comptroller who acts as the treasurer access to the Fed. And so they access services provided by the Fed from their perspective, primarily wire and custody services. In terms of how the trust is managed, the comptroller serves as the sole shareholder of the trust, and they appoint a trust company CEO and delegate authority to the CEO and staff to manage the trust. And then the comptroller may also appoint an investment advisory board per statute to advise the comptroller with respect to managing the assets held by the trust. And then this is according to the comptroller and some of the resources they have, but direct access to the Fed saves the state millions of dollars in fees that would otherwise be paid to commercial banks for those services. And statute does specify that the trust may not engage in commercial banking activity. If you'd like additional information about the powers of the trust, that is contained in Appendix A for those statutes. And then reportedly, Texas has faced some restrictions from the Fed with respect to the trust, but they maintain that they've been able to comply with those policies and restrictions, and they continue to benefit from the account. And then for Tennessee, they chartered their trust in 1979, again, to obtain those services directly from the Fed. And so they received limited access to the Fed's wire and securities transfer system, ACH services, and then check processing services. But due to subsequent policies from the Fed, they closed their bank account with the Fed in 2008, and the department moved all services except check processing to its contract with a commercial bank. And then per written testimony, this was provided to a sunset hearing. The Treasury Department recommended that the trust be discontinued. And so in 2017, the Tennessee General Assembly terminated the trust, and the fiscal note associated with the legislation, provided that check processing is now performed by a third-party commercial bank. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Clarissa. Members, any questions for LSO? Anyone online? Mr. Co-Chairman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Clarissa, this is great. Thank you so much for this research and work that you put in to provide this background for us. The question I have is with the North Dakota Bank, which would obviously have a master account as well. Does the state itself use the State Bank of North Dakota to implement its business practices? In other words, is it using that as a vehicle for its state transactions, or does it use other third-party banks?
Mr. Orr, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I believe they do use the Bank of North Dakota to conduct their business practices, but happy to provide additional information and further clarification on that.
Thanks,
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. And one other question, there was discussion of the concept of corresponding banks where third parties can work through a bank entity that has a master account, assuming that they've been granted the right to have corresponding banks, and then those corresponding banks would work through the master account of that master institution. Are you aware of any of these three institutions that we've discussed that engages in any corresponding bank relationships with any third-party banks that work through their master account?
Ms. Nord?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of any specific practices regarding corresponding banks, but again, happy to look into that for you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Members, any further questions? Ms. Nord? Seeing none, let's go ahead and let's see. Let's hold off on the draft component, and maybe, Mr. Co-Chair, with you're okay with it, we can just go on to public comment and keep that one up
Yeah.
our sleeve if we need.
Yeah.
I know there's probably going to be some public comment on this one. Obviously, we'll go in the room first. Is there any?
I think we should have departments. I think
Yeah,
the
the-
treasurer is online.
Did the Division of Banking, do you guys want to weigh in on this one? Okay, let's just check. I think we might have, Scott, if it's okay, we might have some folks from the treasurer's office, and then we'll bring you up if that's okay.
Yeah, there's no one. Okay. Good.
Okay. Mr. LeBlanc, please just state your name and who you're with.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My name is Norman Blanc. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Wyoming State Treasurer's Office. And there has been some discussion, obviously, about a draft bill directing the State Treasurer's Office to apply for a Fed Master account. The Treasurer's Office does not believe that a Fed Master account application by the Treasurer's Office would be appropriate at this time. We view the granting of a Fed Master account as a low probability outcome with limited to no benefit, while also introducing some unintended risks, some of which the LSO memo outlines, others are unknown. One of the key risks is adding an unnecessary distraction from the Treasurer's Office primary mission, which is to produce the highest possible return on a risk-adjusted basis for the monies that we manage. We are concerned that this is a distraction with very low probability of a positive outcome and very limited benefit. I would point out that when Tennessee, who had this opportunity for 35 plus years, closed their account, terminated the account, they were saying that the most they made in recent years was $80,000. And they closed it simply because the rails that they were offered and the functionality that they were offered were uncompetitive with taking it to a commercial bank. I would also point out that in the case of the state of Texas and Tennessee, both of those applications were many decades ago. And as we know, regulation evolves and it evolves over time. And as per the LSO memo in August of 2022, the Fed changed their application rules for a master account. In doing so, they adopted 3 tiers of applicant. Tier 1 getting the least scrutiny, tier 3 attracting the most scrutiny. It is our opinion, based on initial observation, that we would probably be in tier 3. And at the moment, most tier 2, as well as tier 3 applications have either been rejected or have stagnated simply because the Fed does not see them as applications that they would likely approve. So we would like to state that we in the Treasurer's Office do not believe that this is an appropriate action for the Treasurer's Office to be taking at this time. And I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Committee members, any questions for Mr. LeBlanc? Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. LeBlanc, thank you so much for the work that you and the Treasurer's Office did on looking into this. I know that you spent some time behind the scenes doing some investigation to understand this better, and working with LSO, and that's very much appreciated so that we'd have a better perspective on it. As far as questions, the first I have is with regard to Texas, and do you have any insight into Texas's savings or what benefits Texas is currently seeing, since it looks like they have continued to remain in their relationship with the Fed, even if Tennessee has stepped out. Do you have any insight into that?
Mr. LeBlanc, please go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. I don't have as much direct insight as I would like. We are reaching out to the Comptroller's Office, trying to establish a relationship there which would allow us to obtain better insight. However, it would seem to me that given the powers that are granted by the Fed Master Account, mostly check writing, mostly ACH and access to those rails, there is a substantial difference in the scale between Texas and Wyoming. And I suspect that their scale makes them rather a unique candidate for this service. Secondly, while I understand that it is quoted often that Texas has saved millions, when I see the quote, for example, in the American Bankers magazine, which is where I believe the quote is generally taken from, it is not simply the Fed Master Account that is quoted as saving millions. It's the combination of the Fed Master Account and membership at DTC. And it is unclear to me what portion of the savings come from the Fed Master Account and which portion comes from the membership of DTC. So unfortunately, I don't have, as I said, direct evidence that I would like to have at the moment, but we are working on providing that information and that analysis.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc, for that answer. The next one I have gets at some of the points that you've been discussing with regard to the services that are allowed through the master account and the rail type, so to speak, that you mentioned. It sounds like, particularly with Tennessee, that was rather limited. I don't know how limited it is in their agreement with Texas, but that sounded limited also. I asked a few minutes ago about the possibility of a corresponding bank agreement. And that was one of the things that we discussed at the last meeting, was the idea of potentially having the state have a master account and then allowing for our speedies to establish a corresponding bank relationship through that master account with the Federal Reserve as the concept that that partially inspired this discussion. It sounds to me like the Federal Reserve can grant or not grant that based on their own whims and desires, based on what you've provided for testimony and sort of what we've been hearing and what Clarissa presented in her memo. So do you have any comments on the plausibility of that master account relationship as described? If there were an approval of a master account by the Federal Reserve to the state, we went through the whole process, which we realize is fraught with challenges as described. Would that be a plausible outcome in your view?
Mr. LeBlanc, go ahead.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. I am not an expert in correspondent banking. I have some connection to it, mostly with regard to custody of foreign assets. I would say that if we went through a multi-year process, as you point out, fraught with difficulties, and actually from applying from Tier 3, or managed to be successful in getting a master account, there is the possibility that they would allow correspondent banking. But nothing I've read so far, indicates that anybody has been provided that power or that authority.
Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
Thank you for that response, Mr. LeBlanc. And the last is with regard to the tier rating. And we've been hearing about Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 for the Federal Reserve review process for a while now, and talking about that for a couple of years. And what is the source of that tiering? Is that in U.S. statute, U.S. law somewhere that those tiers are established, or is that some type of internal policy that the Federal Reserve has developed for managing their application queue?
Mr. LeBlanc.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you. My understanding is that is a Fed rule on how they approach their applications, and they have tiered them. Tier 1 being those applications for federally insured institutions. Tier 2, those that are federally regulated in some way, and Tier 3 is the balance. And again, I am not aware of anyone, regardless of tier, who currently has correspondent banking. And again, to emphasize an earlier point, should the Federal Reserve make the determination that we are applying so that we can get correspondent banking for our speedies who have currently been denied that opportunity and are currently in suit in appellate court over that. I don't know what the unintended consequences to the Treasurer's Office might be with regard to bringing us into a regulatory discussion that we probably don't want to be involved in.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Appreciate it.
Mr. LeBlanc, or real quick, first I want to go to other committee members. Any questions for Mr. LeBlanc? You online before I hop in? Mr. LeBlanc, I mean, I think obviously there's a lot of discussion around this topic, and it's kind of the corresponding issues and conflicts that we've been dealing with. But at a basic level, I think we ought to look at this from just a basic P&L, right? How much it's going to cost us, how much revenue is going to generate. Pretty straightforward proposition. Let's talk to the first half of that. In terms of just the costs, I know you don't have them in front of you to the exact amount, but could you give us some kind of idea of what this would be costing the Treasurer's Office to apply, maintain, all that kind of stuff?
Mr. Co-Chair, I don't have an estimate at the moment. We haven't done that work. I will tell you that to previous comments where we could simply take the assets that we have managing the banks that provide this service and apply them to having a Fed master account and running it that way. There is, as every good banker knows, a difference between the resources needed to provide oversight and the resources necessary to actually do a job. And the difference is rather vast. I can oversee a large number of people. I can't do a large number of people's work. We should and could do some analysis as to what it would cost us to apply, what the time would be, and what the distraction would be from our primary mission, which I want to be very sensitive to and about, because it provides approximately a third of the state's budget.
And Mr. LeBlanc, a follow-up, I mean, to your point about regulating people and doing their job, what do you have a sense of it, how many additional FTEs this would require for the
I don't
treasurer's
have that,
office?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that estimate at the moment.
Thank you very much. Or just any further questions for Mr. LeBlanc? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Was there any other state agencies online? Or I think, Mr. Bishop, it sounds like you might want to chime in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Jeremiah Bishop, Banking Commissioner. It mostly just answers some of the questions
please do
from the committee as far as mostly around correspondent accounts. So generally a financial institution can settle transactions directly with a Fed Master account or through a correspondent account. And that both of those are governed by, or eligibility for both of those are governed by the guidelines set by the Federal Reserve. These are not law, these are guidelines the Federal Reserve created a couple of years ago for access to a master account. That's where the 3 tiers are created. Within that same guideline, however, there is a footnote that states that the principles in those guidelines apply to both master account applications and correspondent account applications. So it's my understanding that even if an institution were to use, let's say, assuming that the state gets a master account, if another institution wants to use that master account as their correspondent, it's my understanding that that would also need approved from the Federal Reserve using the same guidelines as to grant access to the master account to the state. So I think the understanding was if the state treasurer gets a master account, they could also act as a correspondent to maybe other banks. Theoretically, yes, but that would also require Federal Reserve approval. So I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of that.
And thank you, Mr. Bishop. Appreciate that. Maybe tagging on to that, can states be a corresponding agent?
Mr. Chairman, I am not sure if there is a certain eligibility requirements, legal requirements for determining whether an institution is even eligible to apply for a master account. Generally, that's geared towards financial institutions. I'm not sure how new those laws are. I don't know if those were in place when these other states were granted access. It is more geared towards financial institutions. One of those is, eligible, yet must be eligible to have FDIC insurance. I'm not sure if the state would. That might be a research project. However, to really get a direct answer, I'm not aware of that though.
Members, any questions for Mr. Bishop? Seeing none, thank you very much. Or Mr. Co-Chairman, did you? Okay. All right, let's open it up to the public for comment. I think, Mr. Meyer, did you want to weigh in on this one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer on behalf of the Wyoming Bankers Association. After the last meeting, I did do some considerable amount of research on some of this and had a very lengthy discussion with the officers of the Texas Treasury Safekeeping Trust Company. So what I've learned is that Texas started this thing in '85 on a special invitation from the feds. That invitation is no longer available. I know that other states have contacted Texas about that, specifically California, but that's just not available to anybody right now. Everybody else has to apply and most likely will not be granted such a privilege as Texas has gotten. The reason that Texas has this probably is because they have the 9th largest economy in the world. So their economy and the trust company can only do state business. So that would be like incorporating in Wyoming, not only checks and stuff, but everything that has to do with the treasurer's office, the investments, the mineral trust fund, you name it, everything would run through this trust company, which is that's how Texas does that. Yes, they do save themselves millions of dollars by doing that, but they are prohibited by law from doing anything that competing in any way with a commercial bank. So they can only use their funds and move their funds between investments. The other thing is that it did not come cheaply. They had to forego their sovereign immunity for the trust company. So anything the trust company does can be sued. And they're not allowed to earn any interest on those accounts. They can earn interest. They can earn money through their investment accounts that they ship money to and from. But they do as a clearinghouse. They're able to do all the transactions they need to do with respect to just Texas entities and Texas funds. But that's why they're a little bit different. Tennessee tried to do that and failed miserably because of the cost and the regulations that with it. Texas was able to adopt whatever they could to follow the Fed's rules and regulations, but Tennessee was not able to do that. So, but they have kept it just to clear their own checks, but they are now using all the commercial banks. I know that there was a couple of questions about North Dakota. North Dakota has a state bank. It's been around for about 125 years. The only reason that North Dakota started that bank was to do ag lending in an area where there were no banks. They have continued to do that, but not everybody can have access to the state bank. They have to be referred to it by a local or commercial lender. A community bank has to refer them to that. And then they will look at that, decide whether they want to take on that customer as far as their loans and what have you. Yes, they have a master account, but they're very restrictive in what they will do. Mostly it's in the agricultural industry. So that has helped them. I think that some of that stuff may be helpful to the committee. Like I said, the trust company in Texas was set up by statute. It is a separate company. Its sole shareholder is a trust, and its sole beneficiary and sole CEO or officer on that is the state treasurer, comptroller for Texas. They do have their own staff. They have 5 top officials, and they have numerous staff underneath it to take care of all that. The amount of work that goes into that is enormous, but then again, consider the size of Texas compared to a lot of other states. The only one that I brought to attention that they told me was being considered at one time was California because of its size, but even it could not comply with whatever was required out there. And then they were told me that that the feds are no longer allowing that or offering that to the states. That's what I've learned so far. I certainly stand for any questions.
Committee members, any questions for Mr. Meyer? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Scott, that's useful information. Thank you for that. On the North Dakota Bank, do they do any state services through that bank? You mentioned ag lending is something that happens, but the rest of state banking services related to the administration of the state, do you know if any of that goes through the North Dakota Bank?
Mr. Meyer.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't believe that the state is using that for their own banking system. They use commercial banks, but it is for ag lending.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Meyer? Representative Singh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meyer, what types of sovereignty over that local banks have would be at risk by adopting a master account?
Mr. Meyer, please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Singh, local banks don't have that sovereign immunity, so they could be sued for anything. This is regarding state entities, so you can't sue the state of Wyoming without its permission, or even the federal government or municipalities or what have you. That got waived when they received the charter and the master account through the feds for the state of Texas. Now that trust company can be sued for anything, misappropriation of funds, anything else anything that falls under that trust company, they are now subject to being sued.
Follow-up, Representative. Seeing none. Any other questions for Mr. Meyer? Thank you for your testimony. Any other public comment out there? Any public comment online? Larissa, Ms. Nord, we're not seeing any. Okay, public comment is closed. You know, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think we love talking about big ideas in this committee. I think this is certainly one of them. I think that's part of just the same way it is in legal discovery. I think it's the same way in the legislative process about what are the facts, what are the pros, what are the cons, and things you have to take into for, I think, truly thorough deliberations. Certainly on behalf of myself, I mean, we heard Mr. LeBlanc. I think for us to continue this, some of those basic questions like, again, what's it going to cost us? What it's going to generate revenue? Obviously, from there, I think we can continue to include some of those other deliberations. So my initial thought was, let's just not take any action on this topic, but Mr. Co-Chairman, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, and certainly the rest of the committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee also and see what the inclination is. My inclination on this is that, when we started this conversation at our last meeting, we had a couple of ideas on how we could try and find a path to Speedy Banks having master account access. This is critical to the state of Wyoming. This was one of those paths, was to explore the idea of a master account through the state and correspondent banking. That sounds like a challenge, quite frankly, based on the testimony that we've heard. It's a significant challenge. The path forward with defensive state banking, the act that we just discussed that we'll bring to the next meeting, sounds like it's a much more straightforward path for us to take at this time. So I think we need to be pursuing at least one of those paths and other paths. But at this point in time, I think standing behind the Defensive State Banking Act and improving that, getting that ready to go is the wiser option. And pushing pause on the master account at this time seems appropriate based on the testimony that we heard. But I'd look to the rest of the committee for their thoughts.
Committee members? Senator Ellis?
Thank you. I agree with Senator Rothfuss.
Anybody online? Anybody in the committee, Mr. Kaufman or Mr. Pope or Mr. Ravel? Not seeing, oh,
there's Mr. Pope.
Mr. Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think a pause is appropriate at this point as well. I don't have any real opinion otherwise on it. I don't see the need to move forward quickly in this.
Thank you, Mr. Pope.
Mr. Yin out there, is he representative?
Yeah, Representative Yin or Senator Nethercott or Senator Furfree. Now is a time to weigh in if you'd like. Seeing
Any hands?
Any hands?
No hands, they're okay.
No hands. Yeah, again, I think it just, we're a big ideas committee. We love coming up with ideas, no matter how crazy or out there they may be. I think that's kind of certainly one of the fun parts about being on this committee, Mr. Co-Chairman, but I think there's just a lot of unknowns, and it's an idea that's certainly interesting, but is very consequential. And I think at this time, we don't know what we don't know. And given the seriousness of this particular topic, there are a lot of those things that we would need to know to move forward and certainly engage in more thorough deliberation. So my inclination is to just kind of hit the pause on this one and let it be. And so without objection, I think that's going to be the action on this particular topic. I know we're a little behind. We're supposed to take up the trust company reciprocity discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, or Mr. Co-Chairman, please.
I think we're going to make it under lunch, honestly.
Yeah,
with the trust company reciprocity discussion.
I think we probably can knock this out.
I know the outcome on it.
Yeah, the next 10 minutes or so. I do as well. Just a bit of quick background for the members and for the committee. Obviously, we had this discussion about last time and some of our trusts, and I think our trust regulation, our trust statutes are some of the very best out there, but there's always that question of how can we get better? There was some discussion about reciprocity. Would that be a net benefit? Would it not be? And I know that kind of teed up for you, Mr. Ravel. I know you put in a lot of effort on this one. So if you wouldn't mind maybe just chiming in and sharing some of your thoughts for the rest of the committee. Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologies, I'm in transit, so I'm not on video, but I think that this, there are a couple of points to discuss on this topic. One is thinking about a broader trust company reciprocity concept, which would allow trust companies chartered elsewhere to access Wyoming in exchange for hopefully Wyoming trust companies being able to access other states. And I think the view that I've gathered broadly through the industry participants and the Wyoming Trust Association is that there are mixed feelings at best that Wyoming has created something very special and that there is a lot to give up by allowing others to benefit from the good work of Wyoming and not a lot to gain by accessing other states. So just as far as a broader trust company reciprocity, there doesn't seem to be a lot of support. The second concept was a narrower sort of defined reciprocity that would be specific to digital assets. And in talking with our former banking commissioner and current banking commissioner in Wyoming, crypto is exempt from money transmission statutes, and digital asset custody is not considered trust business. That's in Wyoming. So I don't believe that a digital asset kind of narrowly focused reciprocity gains Wyoming or the industry, those who are chartered in Wyoming, much benefit either.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ravel. Committee members, any questions for our colleague? Mr. Co-Chairman, do you want to chime in or?
If there are no questions, I'll chime in. It looks like there are none.
Sure. Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Ravel. We really appreciate the work that you've put into this. And Mr. Co-Chairman, it does seem to me that we've explored this and Mr. Ravel has spent a lot of time on it, but the short synopsis of this doesn't look like it's a useful or appropriate law for the state of Wyoming at this time seems perfectly reasonable from my standpoint, right? We explored a great idea. That idea did not pan out. And my inclination would be, once again, to push pause on this, see if in the future it ripens in some way. But at this time, based on those 2 points of analysis that Mr. Revel noted, I don't see a useful path forward that we would want to continue to explore until circumstances change.
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, I would largely agree. I think with any of these reciprocity things, whether it be trust regulation or what be it, if we're entering reciprocity with another state, it comes down to what are we giving them? What are we getting in return? And I think given some of the exemptions that some of these digital assets already have, if there are clear-cut benefits, I'm unaware of them. So I think it probably is best just to hit pause on this and not take any committee action on this. So is there any further
Let's see
discussion
what
or
the rest of the committee thinks? We still have public comment too.
objection? Yeah, I guess. Absolutely. Procedure, always. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Is there anybody from the public that wants to weigh in on this? Any state agencies? Anybody? Seeing lots of heads kind of just.
Everyone's also hungry for lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Super excited about this one. So is there any online? Seeing no public comment is now closed. Again, I think given where this is at, let's just kind of hit pause on this and not take any committee action on this topic. So wonderful. So that puts us right on time.
Ahead of time.
Ahead of time by
schedule.
5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, maybe we could knock out the data privacy governmental affairs bill before lunch too.
We can do that. We do some speed talking. You know, what's 200 words a minute, whatever. We could do that. So it's noon or almost noon. It's 11:56. We're going to break until 1:30 and then we will resume our discussion on data privacy. So see you all back here at 1:30.